Imagine waking up one morning to a world without people. No voices, no footsteps, no hum of machines, just silence. Streets are frozen in time, cars stranded mid-journey, half-cooked meals still resting on stoves that will never be turned off again. Humanity has vanished in an instant, leaving behind cities like abandoned stages after the actors have disappeared. What would happen to our world without us? How would nature respond? How long would our monuments endure? And what traces of our existence would remain for the distant future? This is the story of Earth after humanity, a journey across days, centuries, and even millions of years, into a future where the planet reclaims its throne. The first day without us would not come with thunder or with fire. It would come like a whisper, like a great machine paused mid-motion, leaving every wheel turning without a guiding hand. Imagine the pulse of the world interrupted in a single breath, conversations ending mid-sentence, footsteps abandoned halfway across the street, the vibration of cities stilled, as if a conductor had dropped his baton and the orchestra dissolved into silence. What lingers is not death, but absence, an eerie stillness that makes even the wind sound intrusive. In that sudden quiet, everything that defined human presence becomes a ghostly trace. Streets packed with cars and morning traffic sit locked in place, headlights burning for no one, horns silenced forever. On commuter trains, doors open and close at stations where no passenger boards. In apartments above, kettles boil until water spills over, televisions speak to vacant chairs, and alarms buzz into an air that will never hear them answered. The machinery of everyday life, so confident in its rhythm, stumbles into purposeless motion. Inside homes, the interruption is intimate and unsettling. A child's toy blinks its lights to a room without laughter. A robotic vacuum nudges at furniture, persistent as if routine could summon back its master. In kitchens, ovens finish baking bread that will harden uneaten, while refrigerators hum on, keeping safe food for dinners that will never arrive. Pets are the first to voice distress. Dogs bark at locked doors, scratching until their claws leave pale grooves. Cats yowl, pacing windowsills, their cries echoing into stairwells. On farms, cows low insistently, goats butt against fences, chickens flap within coops. These small rebellions mark the beginning of archaeology's record. Gnaw marks along table legs, scratches etched into door frames, paw prints fossilized in spilled flour. A diary of confusion written not in ink, but in teeth and claws. The silence outside is heavier still. Cities once crowded with footsteps are now empty stage sets. Paper drifts across sidewalks, caught in breezes that seem too loud. A traffic light changes faithfully, red to green to yellow, commanding an audience that no longer exists. Pigeons lift in nervous flocks above plazas, unsettled by the absence of crowds. A single fox steps from an alley, nose twitching, and pads across an intersection where the usual roar of engines has died. The world is beginning to notice its vacancy. Transportation systems stand suspended like forgotten toys. On highways, cars idle until tanks run dry, their engines coughing into silence. Tires soften against asphalt, dashboards glow to no one. In subway tunnels, trains sit stalled, their lights flickering as batteries fade. Rats creep into cars, nesting among plastic seats and discarded papers. Freight trains stretch in yards, chains of cargo forever awaiting destinations that no longer matter. Ships drift on open seas, autopilot holding course until storms or currents claim them. These machines, built to serve, become monuments to their own futility. Yet the stage is not entirely still. The infrastructure of cities continues to breathe, powered by momentum. Pumps push water into towers, sprinklers tick across lawns, and turbines spin at dams with mechanical patience. Nuclear plants hum with restrained energy, servers blink steadily in quiet halls. But the illusion is fragile. A fuse overheats because no hand comes to reset it. A valve sticks, a bearing grinds, a system falters. These first fractures will one day be read as evidence. Scorched copper fused into glass, steel warped from sudden heat, mineral blooms marking stagnation in pipes, forensic traces small but undeniable, inscribed on the first day of silence. Night approaches, and with it the strangest sight of all. Sensors misread the fading light and call the city to life. Street lamps flare along empty avenues, neon signs buzz awake, apartment towers ignite room by room. From orbit, Earth sparkles as it always did, an electric jewel strung along its coasts. Satellites would insist that humanity thrives. But beneath this glitter lies only vacancy. Lights shine to no one, streets glow without footsteps, and the city becomes a ghost theater, still performing though the actors have departed. The world still moves as though people are present, a strange pantomime carried out by machines and systems that do not know how to stop. In power plants, turbines spin and generators thrum with energy. Water treatment facilities send clean water coursing through pipes into towers and faucets that no hand will open. Sprinklers click across suburban lawns, drawing arcs of mist in the evening air. Data centers hum, their racks of servers still blinking, streams of information looping in endless circuits. On the surface, nothing appears broken. The skeleton of civilization continues to function, animated briefly by yesterday's momentum. But the facade is thin. Some systems rely on balance, on constant intervention. A hydroelectric dam that should release water in steady intervals now holds too much, pressure mounting silently behind its gates. A gas turbine spins harder than it should because no technician eases its strain. In a hospital, a ventilator keeps rhythm for a patient who cannot breathe alone. For hours the machine performs, loyal in its service, until the generator that feeds it stutters, fuel depleted. Then the ventilator slows, falters, and the rhythm stops. Centuries later, an excavation may reveal titanium implants and pacemakers scattered within the rubble of wards, metal artifacts crystallized into walls and floors, evidence of fragile lives entrusted to machines that failed on the first day without witnesses. The illusion of continuity reaches even higher, into the skies. On this day, thousands of aircraft are aloft, stretched across continents and oceans. Pilots are gone, yet autopilot maintains steady altitude, trimming wings, adjusting course. Cabins are still, filled with blankets left on seats, plastic cups trembling slightly to the hum of engines. Flight attendants' carts block aisles. Passengers rest mid-journey, suspended in a tableau of absence. Each craft is a ghost lantern moving along the airways, unaware that its purpose is undone. One plane in particular continues faithfully across the Atlantic. Its systems monitor fuel, airspeed, and course, whispering their calculations into a cockpit that hears nothing. Hours pass. The ocean rolls endlessly beneath, silvered by moonlight. Inside the cabin, the silence is immense, broken only by the whir of circulation fans. A half-finished meal rests on a tray. Condensation beads on a forgotten glass of orange juice. The aircraft flies on, as it was instructed, as if the world still waits for its arrival. But fuel is finite, and loyalty cannot alter chemistry. Gauges slip toward empty, alarms cry into the void, and the engines sputter. The nose dips gently at first, then more decisively. The horizon tilts, and the Atlantic swells rise up like a dark wall. Within minutes, the craft is descending helplessly, wings trembling as air resists. Then the impact comes, a violent meeting of metal and sea, tearing the vessel into fragments. The Atlantic scatters the pieces across its floor, seats, fuselage, black boxes still intact, bodies sealed in aluminum shells. Centuries hence, archaeologists may stumble upon this grave. Sonar will trace a scatter of wreckage, an ellipse fanned across sediment. Divers will lift corroded fragments, alloys furred with barnacles, polymers intact against time. They will find the memory unit of the black box, a survivor of pressure and salt, still holding the final heartbeat of a civilization's sky. To them it will look less like tragedy and more like a time capsule, an artifact perfectly preserving a single human habit, the belief that movement always had a destination. Back on the ground, more fractures begin to show. A transformer in a city substation overheats, spilling sparks into the dark. A circuit board warps, fusing into glassy slag. Without maintenance, the power grid falters block by block. Some neighborhoods glow brightly, while others collapse into shadow. The map of human settlement flickers like a dying constellation. each star extinguished not by choice, but by neglect. Yet even as systems begin to fail, the illusion remains strangely beautiful. Street lamps burn along deserted boulevards. Timers switch on porch lights in neat suburban rows. Neon signs buzz over bars and diners where no one gathers. The mechanical pulse continues, offering a performance for no audience. And somewhere beyond, drifting in the deep, lies a broken aircraft that still tells the story of this first day, its remains waiting patiently to be read as the opening line of our absence. Highways fall quiet under the pale light of dawn, vehicles lined up in endless stillness. Engines that once throbbed with impatience are dead, their fuel long since burned. Tires soften against asphalt. Dashboards fade into darkness as batteries surrender their charge. A family car halted in the middle of a crossing becomes a monument to incompletion, its doors locked, its seats holding stories that will never be resumed. In weeks, weeds will press through cracks, curling around wheels, erasing the geometry of human order. For now, the silence clings to the road like a shroud, heavy and absolute. Beneath the ground, tunnels cradle stalled trains. Their carriages glow faintly as emergency lights dim, illuminating empty benches and scattered newspapers left mid-fold. Rats, bold and opportunistic, begin to investigate the hollow cars. They paw at discarded wrappers, gnawing holes into upholstery. The subway becomes a cavern of echoes. The mechanical heartbeat of the city stopped cold. Centuries later, when excavators uncover these tunnels, they will see the evidence. Teeth marks along plastic seating, nests woven from shredded paper, mineral deposits from condensation dripping unimpeded. Each detail will read as the beginning of a new ecosystem forming within the corpse of an old one. At sea, vessels drift without captains. Container ships groan as waves nudge them from their routes, their towering stacks of cargo containers shifting like unstable monuments. Some will circle in vast arcs until storms scatter them, leaving steel coffins strewn across ocean floors. Cruise liners, with their swimming pools full and their dining halls set for meals, glide like palaces into desolation. For weeks they will hold their course, before currents drag them onto reefs or push them against coastlines. When they break apart, their fragments will be repurposed by the sea, hulls smothered in coral, portholes sealed with barnacles. To the archaeologist of the far future, they will appear not as ruins of pleasure but as accidental reefs, confused by nature into habitats. And in the skies, the final echoes of human ambition continue to falter. One by one, aircraft run dry, their faithful systems powerless against the inevitability of physics. Some descend into forests, shattering canopies with explosions that ignite wildfires. Others plunge into open plains, carving scars into soil that will heal quickly with rain and wind. Each crash site becomes an archive, a sealed deposit of alloys, plastics, and bone. Black boxes, the stubborn witnesses of aviation, endure within wreckage. Centuries later, when soil has settled and metal has corroded, these compact devices may still reveal their secrets. Forensic archaeologists might retrieve them, analyzing circuitry fused with mineral veins, listening to the last few seconds of alarm and silence. They will read these as voices of ghosts, data etched into the record of disappearance. Cities above still wear their mask of vitality. Timers summon streetlights, refrigerators sigh in kitchens, escalators climb eternally toward closed shops. Yet here and there the mask begins to crack. A water main bursts in an intersection, flooding streets that no driver will avoid. Sparks leap from an unguarded wire, setting fire to a billboard that burns for hours, throwing orange light over the empty boulevard. Without hands to intervene, the city's resilience thins. Each failure grows into spectacle, and each spectacle leaves a forensic signature. Carbonized beams, melted signage, mineral crusts on abandoned roads. These are the new archives, shaped not by design, but by neglect. In one city, an entire freight yard rests in silence, a cathedral of steel and rust. Dozens of locomotives line the tracks, engines inert, horns forever mute. Crows perch on their roofs, wings spread as they claim vantage over a world finally yielding back to them. The yard is a still life of human ambition. Machines engineered for motion, arrested at rest. When their shells collapse centuries later, archaeologists may find their components layered like geological strata. Iron bones rusted into soil, copper veins crystallized, plastic gaskets preserved in surprising clarity. The locomotives will become fossils of industry, testimony to a species that worshipped movement and left behind immobile idols. And above all this, satellites still orbit, watching faithfully. They beam signals toward airports and seaports that no longer listen. Their cameras capture glowing cities, highways lined with dots of frozen cars, oceans sprinkled with drifting vessels. From the vantage of space, humanity's outline seems intact. But closer to the ground, the truth is written in silence, in animals advancing, in machines stalled forever. The sky records an illusion, while the earth records the beginning of reclamation. Night returns with the confidence of routine, but the routine is hollow. Across continents, timers trigger rows of lamps, spilling pale light across intersections that no longer guide anyone. Neon signs cough themselves awake, buzzing pinks and greens into empty boulevards. Apartment towers spark alive floor by floor, 1,000 rectangles of gold glowing against the dusk. From space, the planet still resembles its old self, lit with constellations of cities, bright arteries of highways, and scattered points across seas where ships remain adrift. To any observer far away, humanity's pulse seems strong. The deception is perfect in distance, but it falters up close. In one district, a transformer labors until its casing swells and ruptures in a burst of sparks. The sudden silence of that neighborhood is total. Lamps go dark in unison, windows lose their glow, and the only light is moonlight glinting on asphalt. A river away, a hospital's final generator coughs through its last liters of fuel. The monitors hold their vigil until the moment power slips. Then all at once they flatten to silence. Rooms filled with fragile breaths collapse into stillness. And the last witnesses are machines themselves, circuits etched with abrupt endings. In centuries to come, these halls may yield a forensic collage. Wires melted into glossy lumps, surgical steel implants fused with crumbling plaster, fragments of polymer tubing preserved in sediment. To the eye of a future investigator, this will look like a shrine built to machines of care, their final offerings trapped in ruin. Meanwhile, the outskirts begin to stir with creatures that waited at the margins. A fox slinks between cars, stopping under the glow of a solitary street lamp. Its reflection in the glass of a storefront is sharper than its own shadow. Raccoons pry open bins, dragging foil and paper across alleys that echo louder without traffic. A deer walks into a cul-de-sac, hooves clicking softly against asphalt, ears flicking at the drone of an air conditioner cycling uselessly. Each small venture presses wilderness further into the stage we vacated. Someday archaeologists might find claw marks on aluminum siding, droppings layered on pharmacy tiles, hoofprints hardened in cracked pavement. They will interpret these not as chance traces, but as the earliest records of succession, the moment nature rehearsed its return. Yet the cities do not yield easily. Buildings still flare with stubborn brightness, towers glowing like candles in a vigil. Billboards beam slogans above streets where no eyes look up. A stadium bathes its field in white brilliance, the scoreboard announcing a tie that will never be resolved. The absurdity of it all is haunting, a civilization performing for no audience, the stage lights blazing while the theater is empty. The hum of appliances continues behind locked doors, ovens warming nothing, radios speaking into silence, elevators waiting in shafts. For a few more hours the choreography holds, as though the absence of people has not yet been believed by the world they built. Gradually, the spell weakens. A block collapses into shadow as its circuit breaker dies. A skyscraper flickers and then darkens floor by floor, its windows extinguished like candles snuffed in procession. Neon tubes pop and fizzle, surrendering with acrid smoke. The boulevard that glowed like a river of amber only minutes ago is a canyon of black glass. Across the city, darkness advances unevenly, a creeping tide erasing the last illusions of continuity. By dawn, Large stretches are swallowed in shadow, their silence even heavier without the halo of artificial light. The first day ends in this uneasy balance, between machines stubbornly maintaining their pantomime and the earth quietly reclaiming space. The glow that remains is more memory than reality, more echo than substance. Centuries from now, remnants will tell the tale. Scorched girders, collapsed circuits, deposits of calcium and rust where water once flowed, carbon traces where light once blazed. They will be read as punctuation marks, the first line of a long sentence written in geology, spelling out the moment humanity vanished. And as dawn approaches, the illusion crumbles further. The embers of our presence fade, but the earth is only beginning its inheritance. The first day was a fragile performance, a pretense of order lit by timers and stored energy. The week to come will not be so kind. Without guardians, dams will swell, reactors will strain, and the heartbeat of the grid will break apart. What has flickered in beauty today will roar in collapse tomorrow. The first day is over, and the earth is ready to push harder. The first week without us begins not in silence but in fracture. Where the first day was a hushed theater, the seventh sun rises over a stage littered with sparks, fire, and water. At the edge of a city, a substation groans under the weight of current it cannot balance. For 6 days its transformers have hummed without rest, their copper coils heating until the insulation softens, then chars. On the seventh day the metal swells and bursts, casting sparks into the dawn. Entire blocks darken in a breath. Neon signs vanish, towers dim to black, and the hum that filled neighborhoods collapses into silence deeper than any before. Across the horizon, other substations follow, a chain reaction of fatigue. From space, the earth still glows, but the map of light is pockmarked now, islands of brightness shrinking within seas of shadow. The collapse of power grids spreads with an eerie rhythm. Cities that once relied on constant human adjustment are left to drift. A turbine jams in one district, plunging thousands into darkness. A breaker sticks in another, releasing voltage in a sudden flare that burns itself out. Across continents, lights flicker in irregular waves, the planet stuttering as its nervous system tears. Inside apartments, televisions cut to black, ovens stall mid-cycle, refrigerators cough and die. Elevators halt between floors, their carriages suspended, doors locked, panels glowing faintly before surrendering. The modern world was never designed to endure alone. Its machines are loyal but brittle, and loyalty is no defense against entropy. The failures are not uniform. Some neighborhoods remain lit, their timers still flicking on lamps at dusk. Skyscrapers gleam like lighthouses in oceans of darkness. These contrasts sharpen the eeriness. Towers blazing in isolation, blocks of brightness surrounded by deep shadow, entire districts vanishing while a single avenue still hums with false vitality. To observers far above, it would resemble constellations collapsing star by star. On the ground, the effect is more intimate. A street that was lit every night for decades falls dark, and the absence of that glow feels heavier than silence. The chain of blackouts leaves behind material signatures. Copper wiring softens into warped coils, fused into walls. Circuit boards in failed substations are scorched, their soldered paths melted into shapeless alloys. In burned apartments, sockets collapse into charred rings, faint halos around them where electricity once lingered. Centuries later, archaeologists examining these ruins would see the unmistakable signs of sudden heat. Vitrified glass, carbonized wood, slagged copper. They would not need to be told that these were the first fractures of a civilization abandoned. The evidence would speak for itself, a forensic record of a system unraveling in less than a week. The blackout brings secondary consequences. Water pumps fail when power cuts, leaving faucets dry, toilets silent, showers trickling only until the last reserves vanish. Pressure that once moved obediently through pipes now falters, pockets of air forming within the system. Some mains burst, sending torrents into streets, flooding intersections and basements. Elsewhere, stagnation sets in, the water turning still and sour. By the end of the first week, neighborhoods begin to smell of damp stone, mildew curling into corners, basements filling with pools that seep upward through foundations. The illusion of stability that survived the first day has ended. The world is now marked not just by absence but by collapse. Beyond the immediate, power loss cripples communication. Servers blink out one by one, their cooling systems long since failed. Networks die silently, packets looping into voids. Satellites still whisper to the ground, but no answer returns. The planet remains bright from orbit, but inside its shell of glass and steel, silence has deepened into fracture. The stage lights of civilization no longer even pretend. They falter, gutter, and die. The first week closes its opening act with darkness and flame. A substation bursts in sparks, a block loses its glow, and entire districts follow. The hum of grids that once spanned continents has collapsed into scattered islands of light. What was once continuity has become patchwork, and what was once reliable has become fragile. The Earth is preparing for a greater shift. The week has only begun, but already the machines are admitting their weakness. Water is the next system to falter. Without constant human adjustment, its balance unravels with quiet violence. Pumps that once pushed pressure into towers wheeze until their power source fails. Valves meant to open and close on schedule remain frozen in place. Pressure builds in some lines while others run dry. The first signs are subtle. A drip echoing in an empty basement, a puddle spreading across the tiles of an abandoned station. But soon the scale grows. Pipes rupture under strain, sending fountains of water arcing into streets. Asphalt buckles, soil erodes, and intersections become shallow rivers. Entire blocks flood in hours, currents pulling papers, chairs, and forgotten toys into the churn. Without treatment plants, the water itself turns against the world it once served. Purification halts, chlorine dissipates, and reservoirs become breeding grounds for algae and insects. Wastewater backs up, spilling into rivers and lakes, staining them with oil, detergent, and chemical residue. Fish begin to die near outflows, their silver bodies rising to the surface in clusters. In coastal cities, seawater pushes into the system, creeping backward through pipes, salting wells, and taps. Stagnant pools form where the flow once surged, rank with the smell of mildew and rot. The breath of water has shifted, once domesticated, now feral. Beneath the city, the disaster deepens. Subways, carved as arteries for millions, are now reservoirs. Without pumps to hold it back, groundwater seeps into tunnels, drop by drop, then in trickles, then in streams. Rain accelerates the drowning. A storm fills stairwells with rushing water, swallowing entire stations. Rails vanish beneath a glimmering surface, signals blink until they short, and carriages sit helpless as the tide rises. Seats, still draped in advertisements, are submerged. Escalators become waterfalls, their steps clattering uselessly under the surge. Within days, what was once a nervous system of transit is a labyrinth of flooded caverns, shimmering in torchlight for any who might have seen it. In one corner of this drowned world lies a train that never escaped. It is a long convoy, its carriages stalled mid-journey on a line deep beneath the river. For a time its lights glow faintly, flickering through green water like the eyes of some startled creature. Then the power dies and darkness swallows it whole. The water rises, pressing against doors, filling aisles, draping seats with silt. Fish dart through broken windows, carrying their scales of light into corridors where commuters once stood. Centuries later, when the tunnels are rediscovered, archaeologists will find this convoy fossilized in mud and mineral. Steel frames coated in calcite, seats encased in stone, fragments of posters preserved like delicate leaves. They will call it a whale of steel, a leviathan stranded in the Anthropocene, its body embalmed by water's slow alchemy. Elsewhere, the floods climb upward. Parking garages become subterranean lakes, cars stacked and half submerged, their headlights clouded with algae. Basements dissolve into swamps, mold spreading furiously along walls, spores drifting like pale ghosts through empty halls. On the surface, entire boulevards shimmer with reflections, lampposts standing like reeds in shallow lagoons. Ducks paddle across intersections. Frogs claim fountains and curbs. What once was traffic is now habitat. The forensic traces of these early floods will endure. Mineral blooms form white halos where copper meets standing water. Iron rusts in streaks across walls, the orange-red patina layering in bands that geologists of the future will misread as natural sediment until context reveals otherwise. Pipes corrode into jagged hollows, their interiors lined with crystalline growths. In collapsed tunnels, stalactites begin to form within decades, sculpted from the very minerals once tamed by human hands. The city becomes a cavern again, water chiseling it back into stone. The first week without us is not uniform. It spreads in fractures, some places burning, others drowning. By its midpoint, the silent miracle of infrastructure has betrayed itself. Electricity has faltered, and now water has changed allegiance. The illusion of order no longer survives the night. Currents carve new paths, systems rot from within, and the world begins to taste of rust and salt. Above ground, towers still blaze sporadically, clinging to their routines. Below, the drowned skeleton of the subway waits, preserved in silence, a monument to how quickly motion can become stillness when caretakers vanish. Beyond the floods, another threat stirs in silence. Nuclear plants, monuments to our control over fire, continue their routines without guardians. For the first days, their emergency systems hold. Pumps circulate water, rods are lowered, and turbines idle down. But the balance is fragile, and the balance is gone. Cooling pools that require constant monitoring begin to warm. Backup generators, designed for hours of crisis, drain their tanks. When the fuel is spent, silence enters the control rooms. Screens flicker, alarms whine unanswered, and the water that kept the cores calm begins to steam. The reactors are not dramatic at first. They whisper, not roar. Heat builds slowly in chambers designed to tolerate it, but tolerance has limits. Pressure gauges quiver, and valves strain. In one plant near the coast, saltwater intrusion seeps through damaged walls, corroding pipes. Another facility inland is struck by floodwater, swamping its backup systems with silt. Without technicians to improvise, every failure compounds. Within a week, the first meltdowns spark quietly, their plumes rising not to cameras but to empty skies. No evacuations, no warnings, no headlines. Only a gray smear across the horizon, drifting where no one watches. Centuries later, this will be legible in the earth. Isotopes will lodge in soils, traces of cesium and strontium forming layers distinct from any natural stratum. Excavators will find twisted steel, concrete bubbled by impossible heat, glass fused into jagged sheets. They will speak of these sites as strange fossil reactors, sealed not by intent, but by collapse. Forensic inserts will describe thermal alteration of substrates, but the truth is simpler. Machines made to be eternal were abandoned, and eternity proved brief. The chemical landscape follows the nuclear. Factories that once bottled acids, solvents, fertilizers, and plastics remain sealed only by bolts and rust. Their tanks, filled to the brim when humanity vanished, wait like landmines. Moisture gnaws at gaskets, bolts loosen with corrosion, and leaks begin in hairline cracks. A stream near one facility turns milky as chlorine seeps in. Another river shimmers with rainbow slicks of hydrocarbons. A warehouse of ammonia vents slowly into the air. Invisible clouds settling across silent suburbs. These releases are not catastrophic explosions, but slow poisoning, inscribed invisibly into soil and water. When the containers fail more dramatically, the signatures are spectacular. An old pesticide plant, overwhelmed by floodwater, releases a plume that settles into a marsh, bleaching vegetation and leaving rings of lifelessness. A refinery ignites when its pipes rupture and spark against twisted metal, turning the horizon into a torch. Even when the flames die, residues remain. Thick, tarry deposits layering streets and drainage channels. These, too, will fossilize. Generations later, drill cores will reveal anomalous bands of carbon-rich residue, laced with compounds unrecognizable in the geologic record. The Anthropocene, already a distinct scar, deepens in a single week. The control rooms, once the thrones of these facilities, sit untouched. Desks are aligned neatly, chairs still bearing the weight of no one, monitors frozen mid-display. A calendar hangs on the wall, the date circled for inspections that never came. Dust begins to settle, and in weeks, mold will creep across keyboards, insects will nest in cable conduits. If future archaeologists unearth these rooms intact, they will mistake them for shrines, diagrams of reactors, formulas scrawled on whiteboards, emergency manuals laid open, all preserved like sacred texts around the quiet heart of disaster. The world outside notices in subtle ways. A flock of birds flies across a plume, vanishing into it and emerging confused, wings coated with particles they cannot comprehend. A herd of deer grazes near a refinery pond, their bodies absorbing traces that will remain in their bones long after they fall. Rain drags down particulates, weaving them into soil. Streams that once nourished farms now carry invisible freight toward the sea. The poison spreads, unremarked and unchallenged, a silent empire of decay. And yet the earth continues to turn. The wind dilutes, the rivers carry away, the soil buries. Life bends, adjusts, or dies, but always it moves forward. These nuclear scars and chemical stains will outlast the century, but they too will be layered, overgrown, forgotten by all but stone. In the first week, however, they stand raw, exposed, and immense, monuments to a species that harnessed fire and molecules, then left them smoldering behind. Fire arrives as the final language of collapse. Without watchful eyes or careful hands, small sparks blossom into blazes that no one moves to control. A kitchen gas line leaks unnoticed in an apartment tower until the air itself becomes fuel. A refrigerator motor clicks, sparks, and in an instant, the floor ignites. The flames run through rooms stacked above one another, turning hallways into chimneys. Curtains flare, wood crackles, glass bursts outward into the night. From a distance, the tower looks alive, burning bright against the dark city, a beacon that no one heeds. Elsewhere, a row of houses goes quietly the same way, faulty wiring frays under strain, hidden behind plaster walls. Hours later, the insulation glows, smoke threads through rafters, and then the roof exhales flame. The neighbors do not wake, the fire brigade does not come, and the blaze consumes one home after another until the entire block collapses into ash and twisted beams. What remains is carbon impressed into soil, layered black seams that future excavators may misread as natural fire deposits until they see the outlines of brick and rebar, fossilized fingerprints of disaster. Industrial fires are stranger still. At a refinery, leaking fuel spreads across concrete, meeting the heat of a motor that spins too long. The explosion shakes the air, tanks split, and a column of fire rises high into the sky. For hours the horizon glows as if a second sun has been lit. Animals flee the edges of the blaze, birds scatter in frantic flocks, their silhouettes flashing against the inferno. The plume climbs, ash spreads, and when at last the fire eats itself quiet, the ground remains scarred, steel puddled into glassy sheets, carbon smeared into streaks, an entire district rendered into a stratigraphy of destruction. Forensic traces of these fires endure stubbornly. Metals soften and warp, their shapes recorded like melted candles. Ceramics craze and crack, their edges sharp against layers of soot. Concrete spalls, leaving pocked surfaces marked with heat blisters. When water seeps later through these ruins, it mineralizes the fractures, laying crystalline veins inside burned skeletons. These will be read as sudden, violent episodes in the Earth's diary, pages inked in flame and stone. Beyond the city, forests at the margins ignite as well. Without fire breaks cleared, without suppression teams on call, small lightning strikes and sparks from power lines bloom unchecked. Hillsides roar as flame runs through brush. Trees detonate with the release of resin, sending sparks into the canopy, multiplying the storm. Smoke blankets suburbs, drifting into empty streets, coating windows with ash. Insects and birds scatter, deer stampede, foxes dart into culverts. The wilderness has been waiting for its opening, and now fire clears it a path. Bridges, warehouses, and towers begin their own sequence of surrender. Without maintenance, joints fatigue, bolts loosen, beams sag. Heat accelerates the decline. A suspension bridge shudders under its own weight, cables snapping one by one until the roadway folds into the river. A warehouse roof collapses during a blaze, its skeleton glowing before collapsing in a rush of embers. High-rise apartments, left to smolder, finally collapse inward, sending plumes of dust across deserted avenues. These are spectacles without witnesses, disasters performed in solitude. In the atmosphere above, the planet records the evidence. Satellites observe the dimming of city lights, while new blooms of fire spread across continents. At night, the Earth no longer glitters evenly. Instead, it flickers between darkness and flame, constellations of blackouts punctuated by infernos. From orbit, it is beautiful, terrifying, and profoundly wrong. The theater is burning, but there is no audience to gasp. By the close of the first week, the pattern is clear. Power grids have failed, water has betrayed its channels, reactors have whispered their poison, and fire has claimed its inheritance. The illusion of order is gone. Cities stand scarred, their towers fractured, their streets drowned or burned. Forensic evidence lies everywhere, waiting to be read. Slagged copper in substations, mineralized pipes in tunnels, isotopes in soil, and carbonized ruins in districts consumed by fire. The Earth is writing over humanity with rapid strokes, but the ink is layered with our remains. And yet, in the hush that follows, another shift waits. Plants sprout in cracks blackened by flame. Birds circle burned towers, scouting ledges for nests. Insects colonize stagnant pools. Frogs croak in flooded intersections. The first week ends in fire and ruin, but already the green world gathers at the edges. In the first year, nature will step forward more boldly, claiming streets, rivers, and rooftops with a persistence humans once believed eternal. The first year without us does not unfold as silence anymore, but as a slow, patient rehearsal of life reclaiming space. Imagine the passing of seasons as if the planet itself is breathing, 4 long inhalations and exhalations that wash across empty streets. Spring rains descend first, soaking avenues still scarred by tire tracks. Within days, fine green blades pierce through cracks in asphalt, delicate yet insistent. Summer comes with heat, vines climbing lampposts, ivy curling around stair rails, weeds pushing through playground sand. Autumn lays carpets of leaves across abandoned cars, gold and crimson blanketing their rusting shells. Winter falls last, muffling the ruins with snow, sealing rooftops in white and drawing black lines of branches against pale skies. A city becomes a time-lapse of metamorphosis, each season layering its voice where human noise has vanished. The transformation begins humbly. Seeds carried by wind and birds germinate in gutters clogged with debris. Dandelions appear first, their yellow heads dotting sidewalks like shy candles. Moss thickens in the shadows of stone steps, its emerald mats spreading soft over concrete. Lichens etch pale stains across billboards, ghostly patterns chewing through painted surfaces. Biofilm gathers on glass, spreading like frost, dulling the shine of once polished windows. In gardens left untended, vegetables bolt and scatter seed, mixing with native plants in unruly beds. Lawns evolve into meadows in a single summer, their tall grasses trembling with the slightest breeze. The discipline of landscaping collapses. Wilderness rewrites the palette. Rains accelerate the process. With drains clogged and pumps long silent, water lingers where it never did before. Puddles expand into shallow ponds, reflecting the sagging outlines of towers. In these pools, algae flourish. By midsummer, green mats cover surfaces where children once splashed. Insects skitter across, dragonflies patrol, frogs lay their gelatinous eggs. What were once parking lots are now wetlands, shallow marshes laced with oil stains that bloom into rainbow slicks. In weeks, nature begins layering its signature over the surfaces of a vanished civilization. Roots are the quiet architects of destruction. They wedge into hairline cracks invisible to casual eyes. At first, these fissures widen only millimeters, but the pressure multiplies as roots thicken. A small sapling pushes upward through a seam in the pavement, its trunk expanding, turning concrete into broken shards. Along foundations, ivy sends tendrils into mortar, prying bricks loose. Within months, walls are furred with green. Forensic study centuries later would read these breaches like pathology reports, microfractures in concrete lined with mineral salts, edges pried apart by organic wedges. To geologists, these are signatures of a biome in rebellion, recorded as mechanical stress inscribed into stone. Trees arrive by stealth. Their seeds, carried from distant forests, root in forgotten corners, an acorn in a rooftop gutter, a birch sprouting from soil collected in a cracked windowsill. A cherry tree blooms unexpectedly in the center of a roundabout, blossoms pink against the rusting circle of cars. Their roots probe down, reaching plumbing lines, curling through basements, breaking tiles. Within years, they form miniature groves where no gardener planned them. When storms strike, these trees sway against towers, their branches brushing glass as if testing the walls of their new domain. Fungi and molds accelerate the collapse. Without heating systems, condensation lingers in rooms, feeding colonies of spores. Wallpaper peels under the black lace of mildew. Plaster softens to pulp. Mushrooms sprout in basements, pale fingers pushing through carpet. Wood warps and buckles, softened into sponges of decay. Lichens eat signage clean, their slow acids erasing letters from billboards and instructions from subway platforms. To a future excavator, these surfaces will reveal not just abandonment but chemistry, patches etched with oxalates, carbonates, and silicates, forensic tracers of biological corrosion. By autumn of the first year, the evidence is everywhere. Streets that once shone under sodium lamps are cracked tapestries of moss and grass. Sidewalks buckle under tree roots, their grids of concrete warped into crooked jigsaw pieces. The walls of once bright houses are blurred with vines. From a distance, neighborhoods appear softer, blurred at their edges, as if the city is being painted over by a hand that works patiently, brushstroke by brushstroke. Winter presses pause but does not erase. Snow covers rooftops, pressing against sagging beams. Ice swells in cracks widened by summer roots, splintering them further. Cars are buried, their curves softened beneath drifts, mufflers rusting silently in the freeze. Yet even in this quiet, the green world waits. Seeds rest under snow, spores cling to rafters, roots lie coiled in soil hardened to stone. The promise of return is built into every dormancy. When spring comes again, it will erupt with doubled force, fed by a year's preparation. The first year closes its opening act with this quiet insistence. Vegetation has pierced the shells of cities, drawn breath where humans once ruled, and inscribed the first signatures of wilderness across stone. Civilization, left without caretakers, has not merely paused. It has begun to decompose. Forensic eyes in centuries to come will read the record clearly. Microcracks lined with root tissue, pollen rains layered into sediment, guano streaks acid-etched into marble. But here in the very first cycle of seasons, the story is visible to anyone who watches. Life is not waiting politely. It is already returning. The animals return cautiously at first, as if testing the silence. Birds are the earliest to claim the spaces abandoned. Pigeons and sparrows flock to rooftops and ledges, unbothered now by the clatter of traffic below. Crows gather at intersections, perching on traffic lights that still blink through their meaningless cycle of red, yellow, green. Their calls echo through avenues once drowned by engines. Hawks hover above stadiums, wings catching thermals rising from still warm concrete. By midsummer, nests line every ledge, gutters become nurseries, and the sky hums with the sound of wings rather than machines. Small mammals creep in next. Rats multiply freely without the checks of pest control. They gnaw open cereal boxes in darkened kitchens, drag insulation to form nests in abandoned cars, and scatter their droppings in places that once gleamed. Squirrels leap through shattered windows to forage, storing acorns in offices and churches alike. Their presence leaves forensic notes written in scratches on wood and gnaw marks in plaster, a language of persistence etched into the architecture of absence. Then come the larger creatures, the ones that lingered on the margins of human settlement. Foxes trot down boulevards, their paws clicking faintly on asphalt, their eyes gleaming in the glow of lamps, still flickering sporadically. Raccoons overturn bins outside restaurants, feasting on spoiled food before wilderness offers new prey. Deer emerge in herds, stepping cautiously between buses long frozen in place. Their antlers brush against bus stop signs as they graze along medians, cropping grass that thrives without lawnmowers. In parks, wild boars root through flower beds, churning soil that once was neatly trimmed. Wolves trail these herds, moving like shadows at the edge of sight. It is in the heart of one such city that a moment unfolds, a story etched into the new balance of predator and prey. A herd of deer has wandered into the central square, their hooves slipping on the rain-slick pavement. The sound of their movement echoes oddly against stone facades. For a time they graze in uneasy peace, cropping weeds that sprout between bricks. Then the wolves arrive. A small pack, lean and silent, slides from the alleys. Their paws leave wet prints across the asphalt, tails low, eyes fixed forward. The deer spook, bolting toward the boulevard, but the pavement offers no shelter. Hooves clatter and skid, antlers crash against a bus, and one animal falters. The wolves close in, circling, darting, and at last bringing it down in the middle of the street where headlights once shone. The rain falls harder, washing red into the drains. When the storm clears, the square is empty again save for the marks, blood streaked across painted lines, tufts of fur clinging to wet asphalt, paw prints trailing into shadow. Centuries later, those paw prints could be found fossilized in layers of hardened mud, pressed into cracks that filled with silt and calcite. Archaeologists might interpret the smear of iron-stained concrete as the residue of industry, but closer analysis would reveal hemoglobin, a clue to the hunt that happened here. The remains of bones, scattered and gnawed, would show the cut patterns of teeth, not blades. It would tell them that predators had walked openly on streets, that prey had fallen where commerce once thrived. The wolf pack had written its claim into the forensic record, one hunt at a time. With predators re-established, the city no longer belongs to us. Food chains weave themselves across plazas and alleyways. Pigeons fall to hawks on the spires of churches, their bones piling at the base of gargoyles. Foxes drag rabbits into subway tunnels, leaving fur scattered on platforms. Boars churn lawns into rooting grounds, planting acorns unknowingly for forests that will rise later. Every act of feeding, every nesting choice, leaves evidence, guano staining marble, scratch marks on bronze statues, feather piles drifting into gutters. These are the footnotes of a new ecology, an anthology of return written page by page in bone and feather. By the end of the first year, the city has become a stage of predators and prey, every corner alive with tension. Rooftops ring with the cries of birds, streets carry the musk of deer and fox, and echoes of howls roll between buildings. What was once an environment held tightly by human control is now a living, shifting biosphere. Civilization has been folded into the food chain, its surfaces layered with guano, its pavements scarred by claws. The city is no longer a structure of stone and glass. It is habitat, and it breathes. Architecture begins its long duel with biology in the first year. What humans built to resist time is already yielding to roots, frost, and rain. Walls designed to last centuries are not impervious to the patient insistence of life. Water seeps into cracks left by the absence of maintenance, freezing in winter, expanding with quiet violence. Bricks spall, mortar powders into dust, and once straight lines bend into crooked silhouettes. Roofs sag under the weight of snow or the invasion of saplings, their shingles curling back as vines drag them downward. Buildings do not collapse in a single moment. They wilt, as though the forest presses them to kneel. Vines are the most visible assailants. Ivy spreads across facades, creeping into gaps, prying stones apart with green fingers. Windows vanish under curtains of leaves, balconies transform into nests of tangled stems. Kudzu races even faster in warmer climates, swallowing entire houses in a single season, reducing them to green mounds. Trees rise from gutters, their roots splitting parapets and water channels. From a distance, towers seem less like fortresses of glass and steel and more like cliffs clothed in vegetation, a vertical forest born from scaffolding. Animals aid in this reclamation. Birds deposit seeds and droppings on rooftops and statues. Their nests clog drainage systems, redirecting rain into walls until plaster rots. Pigeons cluster under eaves, their guano dripping down marble and bronze. Layer by layer, it eats the stone, leaving streaks of acid burn. Centuries later, chemical analysis will identify phosphates and nitrates, unmistakable signals of avian colonization. The weathering will be read as the biological handwriting of a city-turned rookery. Inside, the process is quieter but no less relentless. Without climate control, humidity climbs. Wooden beams swell, warp, and bend until they crack with muffled groans. Termites move in swiftly, building galleries through floors and walls. Ants tunnel in plaster, their excavations spreading like fractal maps. Furniture collapses under their chewing, and staircases become hollow shells. In darker spaces, mushrooms sprout across carpets and through decaying books, pale fruiting bodies scattering spores into stale air. Forensic traces of these fungi will linger long after the wood is gone, oxalate crusts etched into surfaces, chemical halos marking where decay once bloomed. Steel, too, finds its enemy. With paint peeling, corrosion blooms across beams and frames, rust streaks downward like tears, and girders thicken with scale until their strength falters. Bridges groan under their own weight, rivets loosening, expansion joints seizing. In tunnels, condensation drips from ceilings onto rebar, which swells and splits concrete casings from within. These failures are incremental but compounding, and each one leaves indelible scars. Archaeologists of the future will find beams twisted into unrecognizable shapes, their grain altered by rust, their fractures lined with mineral deposits. Such relics will not speak of deliberate design, but of slow surrender. Monuments, once built to outlast generations, meet peculiar fates. Statues are no longer polished. Instead, they serve as perches. Falcons claim cathedral spires, tearing apart pigeons and leaving middens of bones at the base. Bronze darkens to green, inscriptions blur under lichen. Marble saints lose their faces to moss and frost. A plaza once filled with people is now a midden of guano, its stones streaked white and slick. To forensic eyes, these chemical residues, phosphate layers mixed with calcium, will appear as dense strata, markers of a biological colony flourishing where faith once gathered. The cityscape as a whole softens. Straight lines bow into curves, hard edges blur under foliage, and the geometry of planning fades into the irregularity of growth. From above, what was once a mosaic of rooftops and avenues now resembles a patchwork of glades and canopies. Roads serve as rivers for stormwater, their asphalt eroded into channels. Intersections become ponds, traffic circles sprout trees. Aerial surveys, centuries later, might mistake these areas for natural forests with peculiar geometric ghosts underneath. At ground level, the transformation feels absolute. Streets smell of damp leaves rather than exhaust. The soundscape is no longer engines and footsteps but birdsong, rustle, and the scurry of paws. Buildings loom like cliffs in valleys of vegetation, their edges softened, their windows gaping caves. Nature has not merely entered the city, it has rewritten it. Each root, each claw mark, each droplet of rain is both a tool and a pen, carving new meanings into old stone. Architecture does not collapse all at once. It unravels quietly, pressured by roots, rain, and frost, until the balance tilts. In the first year, the duel between stone and biology begins to show clearly. Walls once thought immutable are softened by water, their mortar powdered by repeated soaking. When winter arrives, ice expands in every crack, prying bricks apart with a force no engineer anticipated. The geometry of human order bends into irregularity, and buildings begin to look less like monuments and more like ruins in rehearsal. Vines are the most visible insurgents. Ivy coils up facades, attaching to plaster and stone with thousands of microscopic hooks. Where it pries loose the mortar, water follows, widening the breach. Windows are consumed under curtains of green, balconies sag beneath the weight of tangled stems. In warm regions, kudzu devours entire houses, reducing them to mounds indistinguishable from hills. From a distance, towers that once gleamed as mirrors of the sun appear softened, blurred, their outlines swallowed by vegetation. The vertical city is becoming a vertical forest. Animals play their part in this transformation. Birds scatter seeds in their droppings across rooftops and ledges. Saplings sprout from soil gathered in gutters, their roots probing into seams of asphalt and concrete. Guano stains statues and cornices, a corrosive script written by flocks. The deposits eat into marble, leaving rough patches that, centuries later, chemical analysis will reveal as phosphate and nitrate residues layered thick enough to rival sedimentary rock. What was once sculpture becomes habitat, its surface rewritten by generations of wings. Inside the structures, the assault is slower but pervasive. Without heating or ventilation, humidity creeps upward, settling into corners and ceilings. Wood swells until it bows and cracks with groans that echo through empty halls. Fungi thread through beams, leaving filigree patterns of white rot. Mushrooms rise in carpets, fruiting in the dark with delicate gills that release spores into stagnant air. Books dissolve into pulp, their inks running into rainbow stains. On the walls, black mold spreads like lace, curling across paint, etching oxalate crusts that future archaeologists will identify as fungal weathering. Forensic analysis of plaster centuries later will show faint halos of spore activity, proof of a thriving biome invisible to the human eye at the time. Steel, once our great defender, is equally fragile. Rust forms wherever protective paint blisters away, spreading like a rash. Beams thicken with scale, rivets crumble into red dust, and girders warp as their integrity fails. Bridges groan under their own weight, cables sighing until they snap. In tunnels, condensation drips onto rebar, causing it to swell, cracking the concrete casings from within. With each winter, freeze-thaw cycles multiply the damage. Centuries later, collapsed bridges will lie as twisted skeletons, their fractures lined with mineral veining, their alloys altered by corrosion. Unmistakable forensic signatures of neglect. Even monuments designed to embody permanence surrender. Cathedrals grow dark with moss, their gargoyles softened into formless lumps. Statues once revered are obscured by nesting birds. Beneath falcon perches, middens of pigeon bones pile into archaeological deposits, layers of feather, bone, and guano pressed into strata that mimic prehistoric caves. The plaza that hosted ceremonies now smells of ammonia and echoes with wings. To future eyes, the chemical residues alone, dense phosphate mixed with calcium carbonate, will tell the story. This was a rookery long before it was ever uncovered. The process extends into every corner. Parking garages drip with stalactites of calcite formed from mineral-laden water. Train stations, once echoing with announcements, sprout moss along tiles where rainwater gathers. Stadiums, their seats cracked and broken. Host weeds that grow in waves across stands. A green tide rolling where crowds once cheered. Each space is converted, each function forgotten. What was once civic pride becomes a canvas for succession. From above, the transformation is startling. Aerial views no longer show clean grids of planning. Instead, they reveal mosaics of green and gray, with rivers of foliage flowing through avenues. Intersections appear as ponds, traffic circles sprout trees, and rooftops resemble cliff tops clad in brush. To satellites, the city begins to mimic a forest punctuated by geometric scars. Centuries later, surveyors might mistake it for a natural biome, until they dig and find asphalt buried beneath soil, steel beams fossilized under roots. At ground level, the change feels absolute. Streets smell not of exhaust, but of damp moss and guano. The soundscape is alive with rustling leaves, bird calls, and the occasional groan of collapsing beams. Windows gape like caves, stairwells drip with water, and vines hang in curtains across once grand facades. The duel between architecture and biology is not fair. Biology does not hurry, but it never stops. Every crack is an opportunity, every drop of rain an accomplice, every root a lever. The city is not simply being abandoned. It is being rewritten, absorbed, and transcribed into the language of wilderness. The cycle of seasons completes itself, and with it the city is no longer a ruin waiting to fall but a landscape already alive. The first spring after humanity's departure returns with force. Buds appear on saplings rooted in gutters, weeds erupt in medians, pollen coats windshields and marble alike. Streets shimmer yellow with drifting dust. Cars lie buried under films of plant reproduction. From the perspective of a future core sample, these months would appear as thick bands of pollen layered with spores, clear evidence that rewilding began almost instantly. What seems ephemeral, a gust of yellow clouds, is in fact a permanent record, captured and sealed into the new geology of absence. By midsummer, the rhythms have deepened. Territories form. Peregrine falcons are no longer transient hunters. They claim skyscrapers as their cliffs. Ledges become dining tables, feather piles and pigeon bones accumulating in grotesque middens that will harden with guano into phosphate-rich crusts. Colonies of swallows sow their nests beneath bridges, building with mud and straw that fuse into the concrete itself. Deer herds find their grazing routes, retracing paths along boulevards and riverbanks. Boars root through plazas, leaving tusk marks in fountains, scattering soil across stone. Wolves range openly, their howls threading through avenues at night, the echo bouncing off glass canyons. This is not return as visitation, it is return as permanence. Autumn writes its chapter with abundance. Streets vanish beneath drifts of leaves, layer upon layer muffling even the memory of asphalt. Gutters clog and overflow, sending cascades of amber down stairwells. Branches arch across once straight boulevards, enclosing them in golden tunnels. Rot sets in quickly, fungi bursting from wet piles, mushrooms staining stone with brown halos. Squirrels scatter and bury acorns across parks, inadvertently planting the next forests. Forensic traces multiply, organic carbon building thick lenses atop concrete, isotopic signals of rapid decay etched into soil horizons. To archaeologists of the far future, these deposits will stand out as sudden surges of woodland growth, the unmistakable mark of a biome reclaiming what was paved. Winter pauses but does not undo. Snow cloaks rooftops and cars, softening their outlines into anonymous mounds. Icicles spear from broken gutters, glittering in pale light. Frozen rivers seize bridges in ice, their cracked surfaces echoing beneath fox paws. Deer press tracks into powder, wolves follow in lines of darker impressions, and birds huddle in hidden niches warmed only by their feathers. Beneath the white silence, roots coil deeper, seeds lie poised, spores rest in patient dormancy. The city looks still, but every pause is potential. When thaw comes, all will return doubled. Through this first full year, the balance has tipped completely. The urban machine is no longer recognizable as a machine. It is a mosaic of habitats, humming with interactions. Roads that once bore cars now host succession. Grass, shrub, sapling. Towers that once blazed with light now house nests, roosts, and burrows. The city has become a biome, and it breathes. Forensic evidence abounds. Phosphate layers from bird colonies etching into stone, guano preserving chemical profiles across centuries, microfractures widened by roots, lined with mineral salts, spore crusts in basements, proof of fungal dominance. Every corner whispers not abandonment but transformation. By the end of the first year, the illusion of human permanence has dissolved. Towers stand but no longer as guardians. They are scaffolds for vines and perches for predators. Roads stretch but no longer as arteries of commerce. They are rivers of runoff and corridors of deer. Plazas gleam not with marble but with puddles alive with tadpoles. Civilization has not disappeared. It has been reinterpreted by life into forms we did not intend. And yet a question lingers. The wilderness has proven it can reclaim, but the icons of humanity still stand tall, scarred but upright. How long can stone and steel resist when pressed year after year by root, frost, and storm? The first year ends not in silence but in promise, a promise of greater collapse, a foreshadowing of monuments that will fall. The vines are rehearsing their climb, the roots testing their strength, the seasons sharpening their tools. In the coming century, the icons will no longer be intact. They will be ruins, and in their ruin, the Earth will write its clearest declaration that it does not need us. A century is not long in the rhythm of the Earth, but it is long enough to transform the monuments of humanity into relics. Imagine the slow crossfade of time, where gleaming towers blur into skeletal frames, and bridges that once stretched confidently across rivers fold into the water like broken ribs. In one decade, a plaza still shows its symmetry. In another, it is softened by moss, and by the 100th year it is no longer recognizable. The grandeur remains only as silhouette, eroded by wind and softened by vines. To human eyes, this change would feel abrupt if seen in a single vision. Permanence collapsing into impermanence, ambition dissolving into landscape. The passage is subtle in daily increments, but merciless in accumulation. Concrete discolors and cracks, iron darkens to rust, glass fogs with algae before shattering away. Bells that once summoned thousands lie mute in towers now empty, and the same wind that once carried their voices now howls through hollow beams. The skyline does not vanish with thunder. It fades with sighs, groans, and the quiet insistence of roots. The icons endure not as symbols of power, but as structures awaiting reinterpretation. For animals, they are perches and burrows. For plants, they are cliffs and crevices. For the earth itself, they are raw material, folding back into cycles of stone and sediment. 1 century is enough for bridges to fail, towers to hollow, and libraries to dissolve into pulp. It is enough for cathedrals to sag beneath the weight of guano and time. It is enough for the sea to claim coastal landmarks, stone by stone. The first 100 years do not erase civilization, but they erase its function, and in doing so they recast its remains as strange, unintentional monuments to absence. Bridges are the first to yield. For decades they hold, their cables singing faintly in the wind, their spans defying rivers swollen with storms. But corrosion begins as speckles, pitting the bright steel strands. Freeze and thaw push ice into seams, widening them year by year. A single cable snaps with a sharp twang that no one hears. Others follow, one after another, until the tension can no longer be borne. Under the pull of a storm, the deck begins to shudder violently, resonating with the wind. Then, in a moment of surrender, the structure folds in on itself, towers toppling, roadway curling downward. The river swallows its fragments, laying them gently into silt. In centuries to come, archaeologists will not see a collapse, but a reef. They will find fractured steel lined with rust oxides, striations etched like tree rings into broken cables, slabs of roadway tilted under layers of shell and sand. The bridge will tell its story in mineral signatures. Red seams from oxidized iron, concretions binding wire strands into solid masses, storm-deposited gravel spread across asphalt. The elegance of engineering will be gone, but its remnants will remain, recast as geology. Towers resist longer but cannot defy neglect. Their glass panels, already cracked, peel away in storms and rain down like jagged rain into streets overrun by saplings. Interiors darken, humidity rising until plaster softens, beams swell and ceilings bow. Mold spreads across walls, a lacework of black and green. Birds nest on every ledge, pigeons crowding the lower floors, peregrine falcons claiming the upper spires. Their droppings accumulate season after season, a corrosive snow-whitening stairwells and facades. Over decades the chemistry changes. Stone etched with acid burns, concrete streaked with phosphates, marble blurred into roughness. Forensic analysis long after will recognize these as clear signals of avian colonies, not human habitation. Steel frames betray their fatigue slowly. Paint flakes, leaving raw girders exposed. Rust blooms outward, thickening into scales that flake away with each storm. Rivets crumble into orange powder, connections loosen, and beams twist under their own weight. Lightning strikes towers, sending fire through shafts where elevators once rose. The skeletons hum in wind like hollow harps, tones deep and mournful, the music of structures decaying into air. Some towers collapse in drama, floors pancaking until the structure is reduced to rubble fields. Others linger as vertical cliffs, ivy and birch climbing their ribs. upper floors shattered while lower stories fill with soil and nests. From above, skylines appear less like human design and more like ridges of stone softened by growth. Aerial views reveal jagged outlines blurred with green, geometry hidden beneath layers of biology. To the far future, these ruins may be mistaken for natural formations, until steel beams are found fossilized under roots. The city's symbols thus endure not as triumphs but as artifacts. Bridges rest as ribs in rivers, towers as skeletal cliffs humming with wind. The evidence of their surrender is written everywhere: fatigue striations across fractured cables, corrosion pitting layered into beams, phosphate crusts clinging to facades. The record of ambition is inseparable from the record of decay. Humanity's icons do not vanish. They simply change register, becoming pages in the Earth's book, written in rust and ruin. Museums, once sanctuaries of memory, are among the most fragile victims of abandonment. Their halls, designed to preserve, quickly become laboratories of decay. Without climate control, humidity creeps into every gallery. Canvases once stretched tight sag and buckle. Oils bloom with mold, and varnish blisters into scales. Colors bleed until masterpieces look as though rain has passed directly across them. Wooden frames warp, gilt turns dull, and sculptures, long admired, stand beneath ceilings spotted with leaks. Each drop leaves a bruise of water stain, circles that spread outward until plaster caves and fragments fall like pale snow onto the marble floors. The air itself grows heavy with spores. Invisible armies of fungi colonize fabric and paint, weaving networks across textiles once displayed under glass. Wool and silk unravel into fine dust, while paper darkens and curls. Forensic study centuries later will find oxalate crusts on canvas, chemical halos marking pigment breakdown, and cellulose transfigured into carbon-rich smears. These traces will speak not of art preserved, but of matter dissolving, artifacts merging back into the same cycles as fallen leaves and rotting wood. In storage rooms, where artifacts once lay carefully wrapped, the silence is harsher. Foam and cardboard supports collapse into pulp. Metals tarnish unchecked, bronze furred with green corrosion, silver crusted with black sulfides. Jewelry once glittering is dulled to unremarkable stones. Archaeologists uncovering these layers far in the future will sift through corroded masses, unable to distinguish relics of display from the shelves that once supported them. The museum, once a temple of curation, becomes another midden, a deposit where human culture has collapsed into soil chemistry. Libraries suffer even more cruelly. Millions of books, once lined in careful rows, become meals for moisture and insects. Pages glue together, ink bleeds, and entire shelves sag until they fall in heaps that rot from the bottom upward. The smell of paper, once comforting, turns sour, an odor of mold overtaking the building. Water seeps upward from basements, spreading into the stacks, swelling cardboard, buckling floors. Within a few years, entire wings are drowned, their volumes reduced to black sludge. Imagine descending into one such basement. The air is thick, the light gone, water standing knee-deep. Books float open like wilted flowers, their pages gelatinous, their letters blurred beyond recognition. Shelves tilt, collapsing into the water with muffled splashes. Centuries later, when excavators sift through the silt, they will find thin black layers, carbonized cellulose mixed with spores and mineral deposits. To them, it will look like a compressed forest, but it will be the remains of human thought, words reduced to strata. Even stone is not immune. Marble busts crack along veins as moisture seeps in and freezes, each winter prying the fracture wider. Dust settles thick across dioramas. Insects nest in felt and fabric once arranged to mimic natural history. Taxidermy, proud lions and tigers frozen in poses of authority, slumps into collapse. Their skins peel, glass eyes fall, straw innards spill into heaps. Beetles consume them until only bones remain, scattered beneath the glass that once held them safe. Archaeologists will discover these bones encased in soil, their articulation strange, not from wild hunts but from staged displays left to disassemble themselves. The silence of reading rooms and galleries is deeper than elsewhere. These were places meant to echo with whispers, footsteps, and the breath of awe. Now they echo only with the drip of water, the scratch of claws, and the collapse of ceilings. Pigeons enter through shattered windows, scattering feathers across once hallowed rooms. Their guano accumulates on shelves, searing paper into compost, a chemical rewrite of entire collections. Future analysts will identify the phosphates mixed into soil layers where books once stood, clear evidence that flocks, not scholars, occupied these spaces. The loss feels intimate because these buildings were designed not for utility, but for memory. They were humanity's attempts to resist forgetting, to preserve art, knowledge, and story against the tide of time. Yet without custodians, they fall faster than any other structure. Within decades, the museums are damp caverns where paintings rot and statues crumble. Within a century, libraries are crypts of blackened pulp, their words erased into silence. The irony is cruel. Humanity built these places to ensure its voice endured, and they are the first to lose it. But the record is not gone entirely. It is simply rewritten. Spores leave halos across pigments. Inks leach into waterlogged plaster. Faint stains detectable long after text is unreadable. Bronze leaves chemical shadows in the soils where it decays. Carbonized layers of paper record themselves as thin seams in strata. The artifacts of art and knowledge do not vanish. They transform into forensic echoes, the faintest signatures of intention. They tell a story not of preservation, but of surrender. Cathedrals were once raised to defy centuries, their stone carved with the confidence of eternity. For decades after our absence, they stand proud, their spires still piercing the sky. But even these monuments cannot resist the patience of weather and biology. Roofs leak, water seeps along beams, frost wedges cracks deeper each winter. Ivy clings to buttresses, its roots prying joints apart, while moss spreads across statues until faces blur into green anonymity. Birds become their congregations. Pigeons roost in lofts, starlings gather in choirs, and falcons claim towers as hunting perches. Generations of droppings layer thick across pews and altars, turning marble slick and stone acidic. Guano accumulates until it becomes a geological crust, white veins cutting through floors once polished for processions. Centuries later, phosphate and nitrate layers will testify more clearly than inscriptions. These were no longer temples of worship, but vast rookeries. The air grows heavy with dust and feathers, echoing not with hymns but with wing beats. Organs collapse, their pipes corroded and warped, keys buried under debris. Stained glass windows, once blazing with saints and stories, shatter in storms, their fragments falling like jewels into weeds sprouting across flagstones. The cathedrals remain awe-inspiring, but the awe is strange now. Not reverence for design, but for the spectacle of ruin becoming habitat. Stadiums crumble more quickly, their vast roofs tear under storms, sections collapsing in crescendos of twisted steel. Plastic seats bleach under the sun, cracking into flakes that scatter like brittle leaves. Weeds rise through concrete aisles, then saplings, then trees. In the field, deer graze where players once sprinted, and predators hunt at night across a grassland framed by collapsing bleachers. Archaeologists of the far future will find bone deposits scattered across these pitches, confused at first with sacrificial grounds, only to realize they are middens of predators who reclaimed the arena. And then comes the night when grandeur fails in a single breath. A storm lashes across the old city, winds screaming, rain hurling sideways against stone. For centuries the cathedral has resisted, but its great dome is cracked, its mortar weakened, its support softened by moisture. Lightning strikes the spire, and the structure groans, a sound deep as thunder, but born of stone. At last, the arch gives way. The dome splits and crashes inward, crushing pews, scattering fragments across the nave. Dust erupts in a choking cloud that billows through shattered windows into the square outside. Birds explode from the rafters in panic, a storm within a storm, wings flashing against the darkness. By morning, the dome is gone. Only jagged ribs remain, arching like broken fingers against the sky. In the square, a blanket of dust covers everything, gray powder layering statues and fountains. Mixed within are bones of pigeons crushed in their sleep, feathers coated white with stone. The plaza that once held festivals and prayers has become a grave of fragments, stone and bone interwoven. Centuries later, excavators might uncover this scene intact. They would find the phosphate crusts from guano fused into marble, the collapse horizon marked by thick dust bands, and bone middens sealed within rubble. To them, it will appear not as catastrophe but as stratigraphy, a distinct layer telling of a night when architecture surrendered in a single collapse. They will call it the dome event, a point where stone and biology wrote together. Stadiums mirror the same fate, though more drawn out. Roof trusses snap one by one until the sky opens fully above. Bleachers disintegrate, their steel skeletons furred with rust, their steps layered with soil where weeds root deeply. By the end of the 1st century, stadiums are bowls of earth, amphitheaters for wildlife. Foxes hunt rabbits where crowds once roared, and weeds rise as banners taller than the flags that ever waved. Cathedrals and stadiums, different in purpose, converge in destiny. Both were built to gather masses, to embody spirit and spectacle. Both now gather life of another kind, flocks, herds, predators, and decay. Their stones and steel no longer speak of glory, but of adaptation. They stand not as monuments, but as habitats, rewritten by time and circumstance. The sea claims what we once built at its edge. For centuries, cities pressed proudly against the water, lining coasts with promenades, harbors, and monuments meant to greet the horizon. 100 years without us, the ocean has pressed back. Waves gnaw at seawalls, storms batter foundations, and the quiet rise of tides laps higher each season. Marble stairs once descending gracefully to the water are drowned, their edges blurred by algae. Bronze statues stand chest-deep in surf, their surfaces mottled by salt, barnacles clinging to their shins. The line between land and sea has shifted, swallowing plazas and museums alike. Storm surges hasten the process. One great hurricane, sweeping across the coast, piles water against the shore until avenues become rivers and boulevards drown. Museums built to enshrine heritage are gutted in a single night. Salt water pours through galleries, lifting canvases from walls and scattering fragments across tiled floors. In the morning, the ocean retreats, but the building remains half drowned, its doors gaping, its treasures melted into pulp. Fish dart through basements where archives once rested, and corals begin their slow construction across collapsed stairwells. Harbors transform most dramatically. Piers collapse as wood rots and iron supports crumble, their timbers drifting away to sea. Shipping cranes, once towering, topple into the surf, becoming skeletons for barnacle forests. Container yards, left stacked and silent, are breached by waves. Some containers sink intact, entombing artifacts in saltwater vaults. Others rupture, scattering their cargo into currents. Plastics drift endlessly, some washing ashore, others sinking to form thin lenses across the seabed. Forensic analysis far in the future will find these plastic layers pressed between shells and sand, unmistakable markers of the Anthropocene written most clearly at the edges of oceans. Coastal monuments fall by increments. Lighthouses, battered by waves, lose their footing as rock beneath them erodes. One tilts gradually over decades, leaning into the surf until at last it collapses, sending stone tumbling into tide pools. Seawalls crumble stone by stone, their remains strewn across beaches, mingled with shells and seaweed. Archaeologists uncovering these deposits will find storm lag layers, gravels and shell hash mixed with fragments of brick and tile, sedimentary proof that human structures were undone by waves and folded into marine beds. The climax comes with storms of rare magnitude, the kind that arrive once in a century. Wind howls across the coastline, seas rise meters higher, and entire districts are swept clean. Bridges already weakened collapse into bays, domes fall under pressure, and seawater hammers through glass facades. The surge pulls artifacts outward. Statues topple into surf. Slabs of pavement tumble into deep channels. Entire waterfront blocks sink beneath foam. What remains afterward is not a city on the coast, but a reef of ruins, jagged outlines hidden below tides. In the silence that follows, life moves in. Fish shoal through drowned galleries, eels coil among cracked statues, and corals lace themselves around steel frames. Barnacles encrust the ribs of bridges now lying sideways on seabeds. Mussels fill cracks in marble. Seaweed drapes across rooftops visible only at low tide. The sea has turned heritage into habitat. What once was meant to inspire awe now serves as foundation for colonies of anemones, sponges, and mollusks. Forensic traces abound. Shells cement into mosaics across tile floors. Salt crystals bloom from drowned plaster, forming white crusts decades later. Brick fragments are tumbled smooth, indistinguishable from pebbles until chemical tests reveal their baked clay. Deep cores along drowned boulevards will show storm deposits laced with ceramics and concrete, thin but undeniable signatures that cities once reached the water's edge. By the century's end, the coast is no longer a boundary between human ambition and ocean, but a collaboration of both. Where harbors bustled, reefs thrive. Where lighthouses guided, fish swarm. Where museums displayed, corals bloom. Humanity's monuments endure not as warnings or guides, but as scaffolds for life. The first century has written its verdict in rust, collapse, and salt. Bridges lie as ribs in rivers, towers hum with wind, cathedrals sink under dust, stadiums turn to pastures, and coasts dissolve into reefs. Icons built to last forever have lasted only long enough to be folded into the earth's cycles. Their remnants are clear, but their meaning is changed. They are fossils, not functions. And as the century closes, another scale of time begins to speak. The earth has erased function, but not yet form. In the coming millennium, even these shells will falter. Stone will fracture, steel will vanish, and only faint signatures in soil and rock will remain. The Anthropocene will be visible not as monuments, but as strata. The next chapter belongs not to ruins still standing, but to the record they leave when even ruin has turned to sediment. At the base of a sea cliff where storms have bitten deeply into the land, the Earth's memory lies exposed. Layers of sand and clay lie stacked in muted tones, a slow diary of tides and rivers, but in the middle of them is a seam unlike any other. It is no more than the width of a hand, yet it glitters strangely under sunlight. Shards of plastic sparkle blue and green beside fragments of glass. Threads of steel, long since oxidized, run like rust-colored veins through gray rubble. Chunks of concrete, hardened into carbonate nodules, sit like pebbles pressed into the stratum. This is the Anthropocene layer, the geological signature of humanity, written into the Earth's archives after only 1,000 years of absence. At first glance, it resembles an ordinary storm deposit, a jumble of stones and debris washed into place. But a closer look reveals its strangeness. Quartz crystals are fused with melted polymers. Seashells are pressed against fragments of rebar. Fish bones lie beside splinters of ceramic. This juxtaposition is not natural. It is the mingling of biology and industry, sediment and technology, written into stone. A geologist of the far future could identify the moment instantly. Here is where a species transformed its world and then vanished, leaving its ambition compressed into a single horizon. One millennium is a blink in geological time, yet it is enough to fold human creation into bedrock. The skyscrapers that once thrust into the sky, the bridges that stretched across water, the foundations of entire cities, all have collapsed, weathered, and been transcribed into stone. The earth has not erased us. It has preserved us in its own script, layering our artifacts into geology as if we were fossils of intention. Steel, our proudest alloy, was the first to betray us. For the first decades after our absence, it remained strong, beams still rigid, cables still taut. But corrosion had already begun. Moisture gnawed at surfaces, salt ate through protective coatings, and frost fractured tiny seams. Within centuries, the bright sheen dulled to a matte red, scales flaking away until beams thinned and collapsed. By the 5th century, most towers and bridges had shed their skeletons, their cores dissolving into soil and water. By the 10th, little remained that looked like steel at all. What persisted was chemistry. Iron had seeped downward, staining sediments with rust-red horizons, forming veins of hematite and magnetite that traced the ghosts of structures. Archaeologists of the distant future may misinterpret them as ancient ore deposits until they see the impossible symmetry. Parallel bands running where once stood a bridge. Concrete, humanity's artificial rock, followed a slower transformation. When buildings collapsed, their walls shattered into rubble and their foundations sank beneath soil. Rain filtered through the fragments, dissolving calcium compounds and redepositing them as carbonate crusts. Over centuries, the rubble knit itself into a new kind of limestone, porous, uneven, but durable. What once was sidewalk or tower footing became stone lenses within the earth, indistinguishable from natural formations, save for faint lines of aggregate, shards of brick, flecks of glass, rust-stained pebbles embedded like fossils of industry. Forensic study would show the tiny bubbles of trapped air within, fingerprints of mixing and curing. A millennium later, these details survive, subtle whispers that the stone was not born of sea or volcano, but of human hands. Ruins across the world illustrate this same transformation. Bridges that collapsed into rivers now lie as ribs of stone and iron beneath silt, their decks pressed flat and their supports encased in algae before burial. Towers, once symbols of commerce, have slumped into heaps, covered first by vines, then soil, then forest. Excavated centuries later, their remains are no longer architecture, but stratigraphy. Calcite veins threading through fractured concrete, magnetite bands replacing steel, entire layers of rubble compacted into shale-like sheets. To the eye of time, this process is not destruction, but translation. Steel and concrete have not vanished. They have become part of geology. What we once lifted proudly into the air has been folded into the ground, made eternal not as monuments, but as minerals. The Anthropocene seam holds them tightly, a chapter in the book of Earth written in rust and stone. The irony is sharp. Humanity designed these materials to endure, to outlast wood, clay, and bone. In a sense, they succeeded. No cathedral of medieval stone, no temple of ancient marble has left so vivid a chemical mark in so little time. Yet their endurance is not as we intended. Bridges do not remain standing, towers do not remain whole. Instead, they persist as scars, oxide horizons, carbonate nodules, strange veins that will puzzle geologists until context reveals the truth. Permanence was achieved, but only as evidence of impermanence. What 1,000 years reveals most clearly is this: steel and concrete have crossed the threshold from artifact to stratum. They are no longer tools of a species, but layers of a planet. Future scientists may argue whether to name this layer after us, or whether to see it simply as a brief anomaly in the Earth's cycles. But no matter the name, the seam exists, thin and undeniable, a horizon glittering with the remains of ambition. If steel and concrete have blended into geology, plastics tell a different story. They resist, but in resisting they mutate. For centuries, sunlight cracks them, salt water softens them, and fire melts them into strange hybrids. On beaches, fragments of bottles and bags fuse with sand and lava rock, producing what geologists now call plastiglomerates, stones studded with bright flecks of polymer. Some are smooth, their surfaces melted into glassy sheen. Others are jagged, a chaotic mingling of human chemistry and Earth's raw material. To a core drilled through dunes, they appear as bands of black and green, thin streaks running between layers of ordinary sand. These are the technofossils of the Anthropocene, unmistakable and indelible. Glass fares better in its claim to eternity. Shards scattered from windows, bottles, and screens lie almost unchanged after 1,000 years. Weather frosts their surfaces, smoothing edges, but their shapes endure. In rivers, shards tumble into pebbles, translucent stones mistaken for quartz. On coasts, storm surges bury them in beaches, pressing them into bands that sparkle under future excavation lights. To geologists centuries hence, these deposits will be as distinctive as volcanic glass, a horizon glittering with sharp edges and green-tinted fragments, markers of a species that turned sand into tool and ornament by fire. Ceramics outlast them all. Plates, tiles, bricks, and porcelain toilets resist even the most aggressive decay. Their glazes remain bright, their fragments sharp. Future archaeologists will find them scattered like shells across ancient streets, preserved in middens that have long since become sediment. In strata, they appear as clean, angular inclusions, crystalline surfaces untouched by time. If all else is erased, ceramics will testify. Humanity fired earth into shapes, and those shapes endured. Forensic eyes read these materials as an alien grammar. Plastics become streaks of carbon polymers bonded with minerals, a layer unlike any before. Glass appears as sharp lenses within soil, reflecting light where no quartz should. Ceramics sit as impossible inclusions, too uniform, too polished, a dead giveaway of culture. Together they form the clearest horizon of the Anthropocene, a chemical and mineral fingerprint impossible to misinterpret. And yet, what meaning will be drawn from these signs? Imagine, in some future epoch, a being clever enough to dig into this seam. Its tools scrape through layers of sand and soil until they strike plastiglomerate, until they uncover shards of porcelain gleaming still, until they brush dirt from a plate decorated with patterns that remain after 1,000 years. The archaeologist pauses, puzzled. It lifts a fragment of fused plastic and basalt, its surface bubbled like volcanic glass. The layer surrounding it is rich in shells and fish bones, and the archaeologist interprets the fusion as ritual fire, a sacred act of combining land and sea. A porcelain shard is examined next, its glaze shining unnaturally smooth. To the archaeologist, it resembles jewelry, an ornament left by a vanished people. The bright colors of tile fragments suggest ceremony, perhaps an offering to gods. The scatter of bones nearby, cattle, dogs, and cats, is read not as the residue of daily life, but as sacrifice. The archaeologist of the future builds a story of worship and cataclysm, from what we know were only trash, kitchens, and accident. In this misreading lies a strange irony. Our everyday materials, the mundane refuse of a species, become to future eyes objects of myth. They will not see landfills, they will see shrines. They will not read plastiglomerates as pollution. They will see them as sacred stones, tokens of a civilization obsessed with transformation. What we discard becomes our clearest scripture, though the words are wrong, though the meaning is lost. The earth itself preserves the evidence clearly. In cliff faces, blackened streaks of melted polymer run like veins. In core samples, layers of glass shards catch the light. In soil horizons, ceramic fragments gleam sharp against dull grains of sand. The record is unmistakable. Humanity's chemistry entered geology. Our plastics and ceramics did not vanish. They endured, not as tools, but as fossils. A millennium without us has shown their resilience, but also their mutability. Plastics break into smaller and smaller shards until they drift like dust in sediments. Glass dulls but never disappears. Ceramics remain sharp, cutting across layers as though frozen in time. These technofossils are not just remnants, they are markers, a horizon line as distinct as an asteroid's impact or a volcanic eruption. They are the signature of a species that tried to leave permanence in its refuse and succeeded too well. Bones, too, have their place in the Anthropocene layer. But they are not only the bones of wild creatures. In many regions, the remains belong mostly to domesticated animals, cattle, pigs, dogs, and cats. Herds that once filled farms collapsed quickly in the first decades without care. Their skeletons gathered in barns, pastures, and feedlots, creating concentrated bone beds that in time became fossil deposits. 1,000 years later, these clusters remain distinct. Archaeologists digging through them would be struck by the odd uniformity. Hundreds of cattle bones, all the same age, stacked together, unlike the scattered patterns of natural death. Such sites tell not of herds grazing freely, but of agriculture frozen in place, a sudden silence written in skeletons. Dogs and cats left their marks as well. Some roamed, forming feral packs, their bones scattered across forests and city ruins. Others died quickly, leaving their remains in homes buried beneath collapsing roofs. Their teeth and claws endure, enamel shining white in soil long after fur and flesh are gone. Future analysts will find them alongside human debris, collars, bowls, fragments of toys, and reconstruct a picture of companionship that once defined an entire species. To them, these deposits may look like ritual burials. In truth, they are accidents of abandonment, pets waiting for caretakers who never returned. The isotopic record is even clearer. Across the globe, a thin line of carbon anomalies appears in cores drilled through soil. The detonation of atomic bombs in the mid-20th century left a pulse of carbon-14, an unmistakable spike that endures for tens of thousands of years. Even a millennium later, this isotopic fingerprint remains sharp, a global timestamp of human technology. Alongside it are nitrogen and phosphorus enrichments, residues of fertilizers spread across continents. In floodplains and lake beds, these elements appear as chemical signatures, unnaturally dense, far beyond natural cycles. Forensic analysis, centuries later, will not confuse them. They are the calling cards of industrial agriculture. Chemical fingerprints extend further still. Thin, black seams of ash and soot stretch across regions once industrialized. Coal burning, oil combustion, and wildfires fueled by abandonment left behind a horizon of char. To the naked eye, it looks like a simple layer of dark soil. To geologists, it is a global anomaly, its microscopic particles revealing origins in furnaces and engines, not volcanoes. The soot contains spherical carbon beads, fly ash, objects that form only in controlled combustion. To a future investigator, this is as clear as finding meteorite dust after an impact. It is proof of a species that burned to sustain itself, leaving a dark shadow pressed into stone. The forensic record is overwhelming. Isotopic anomalies, chemical residues, fossilized bone beds, together they weave a story more enduring than memory. No matter what is forgotten, the chemistry remains. Even if no written word survives, future scientists will know that the planet shifted in this millennium. They will read it in bones clustered unnaturally, in nitrogen spikes layered in fields, in the silent testimony of ash horizons. What is most striking is how unnatural these patterns appear against the deep history of the Earth. Natural extinction events leave broad scatterings of species, diverse but sudden. Here, the fossils are skewed. Too many cattle, too many dogs, too few deer or wolves. The imbalance is a signature itself, evidence of a species that bent ecosystems to its will and then left them to collapse. To archaeologists of the far future, this strangeness will be the clue that sets the Anthropocene apart, not just a layer of technofossils, but a layer of ecological distortion. 1,000 years have blurred monuments and erased texts, but bones and chemistry persist. They tell not stories of culture, but of biology and industry, written in calcium and isotopes. The cattle herds that fed billions, the pets that shared homes, the fertilizers that fattened fields, the soot that darkened skies, all remain etched into geology. Humanity is visible here not in statues or ruins, but in the bones of animals and the chemistry of soil. The Anthropocene seam grows clearer, the deeper one looks. It is a boundary that will endure long after the ruins crumble, a line of evidence unmistakable against the long scroll of Earth. It is the Earth's way of saying, they were here, they changed me, and I carry their memory in stone. By the close of 1,000 years, the world has moved far beyond the silence of collapse. Forests now cover what were once avenues, roots coiling deep into rubble until stone itself yields. Meadows spread across plazas, rivers braid freely through ruins, and cities are absorbed so completely that only odd lines of stone hint at their past. The landscape is not a palimpsest waiting to be read. It is a thriving biome, a hole in which human traces have been digested and remade. Animals roam with ease. Wolves and bears prowl through valleys that were once downtowns, their paths tracing streets only visible from the air. Elk and bison graze where airports once stretched, their hooves pressing tracks into soils enriched with nitrogen from centuries past. Birds wheel above skyscraper ridges now blurred into cliffs, falcons nesting where spires once gleamed. The food chains are whole, predators and prey circling each other across terrain that no longer remembers boundaries. Insects, fungi, and plants churn steadily, filling every gap, replacing every hollow. The Anthropocene has not ended with ruin. It has transformed into wilderness. Yet underfoot, the record remains. Roots dig into fractured concrete, carrying minerals upward, but also sealing human fragments downward. Water seeping through soils leaches calcium from rubble, leaving calcite crusts in caverns that once were subway tunnels. Plastics lie pressed in seams, their colors dulled but not erased, streaks of black and green frozen among sand grains. Bone beds, softened by time, mineralize fully, turning livestock into fossils distinct from wild herds. Isotopic signals persist, carbon and nitrogen spikes etched into the chemistry of sediment. Forensic inserts are everywhere. Plastiglomerates embedded in cliff faces, soot bands layered in lake beds, ceramic shards gleaming in river cuts. Seas have swallowed entire coastlines. Harbors are reefs now, thick with coral binding itself to rusted steel. Statues lie encrusted, their features blurred by shells, their pedestals transformed into tide pools. Inland, rivers have shifted, burying cities beneath layers of silt. Excavators in the far future will find these places not as ruins, but as strange stone beds, where mollusks and mammals share equal footing in the archive. Every detail testifies. This was the millennium when human form was folded fully into Earth's own story. The climax of this chapter lies not in a single collapse, but in the recognition of a horizon. Drill a core into soil almost anywhere on Earth, and the Anthropocene seam appears. It is the line of plastics and glass, the spike of carbon isotopes, the scatter of cattle bones, the crust of concrete nodules. It is as distinct as the clay band left by the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs. It is humanity's true monument, not a tower or temple, but a stratum visible for millions of years to come. Above, the living world flourishes. Where people once cleared forests, ancient groves rise again, their trunks vast and gnarled, roots pushing aside stone foundations. Where farmland spread in neat grids, prairies return, thick with grasses waving under the wind. Great herds roam freely, unconstrained, their migrations stretching across continents without borders. Predators balance prey, seeds scatter in fur and feather, ecosystems weave themselves whole. The Anthropocene scar is deep, but the biosphere has healed over it, covering wounds with life. And yet, the Earth does not forget. Every step in these new forests presses down upon layers glittering with glass shards, bones, and soot. Every bird that sings in branches above is perched on soil streaked with nitrogen from fertilizers spread 1,000 years before. The surface is wild again, but the depths are memory. Humanity is present not in monuments, but in chemistry and stone, etched as clearly as any fossil bed of trilobites or ammonites. The closing truth is simple. After a millennium, humans are gone, but the Anthropocene remains. Our cities have become forests, our coastlines reefs, our fields prairies. But in the rocks lies a stratum of our ambition, unmistakable, undeniable, enduring. It is not a triumph, nor entirely a tragedy. It is a signature, a line the Earth will carry for millions of years, marking the brief moment when one species believed itself eternal and proved it only in sediment. Time stretches differently when measured in millions of years. What feels like permanence in a century dissolves into a heartbeat when the Earth is viewed through deep time. Imagine the world as a sequence of jump cuts. An ice sheet slides over continents, then melts away. Forests march northward, then retreat before drought. Seas advance inland, then fall back, leaving cliffs and stranded bays. Mountains rise, rivers carve new valleys, deserts expand and shrink. Each transformation occurs slowly in the moment, but when compressed, it is a film of constant change, flashing from frame to frame. Humanity is long gone, yet its mark lies buried deep. The Anthropocene seam still exists, but it is fading under kilometers of new sediment. Plastics and steel are pressed thinner, their colors muted, their edges blurred. Ash layers flatten, bone beds compress into fossilized bands. To future eyes, this horizon will look no more than a thin line, like the clay band that marks the extinction of dinosaurs. But in that line, the whole story of our age survives. The surface above it no longer carries ruins. It carries forests, herds, predators, and seas that know no master. Life has not merely returned. It has reshaped the world in forms unrecognizable to our memory. Radiations of new life emerge where gaps were left behind. With people gone and the climate shifting through ice and warmth, ecological niches stand open, waiting to be filled. Birds, always the opportunists, take first claim. Some that once scoured cities for scraps grow larger, adapting into aerial hunters of staggering size. Their wings span wider than a human could stretch arms, their cries echoing across valleys now filled with forest. They perch on basalt cliffs where towers once stood, their talons gripping stone, their nests woven from branches and bones. The fossil record will remember them well, claw marks etched into hardened sediments, bones compacted into middens at cliff bases. Rodents, freed from the pressure of human control, expand into roles left vacant. Descendants of rats and mice grow heavier, bodies stretching into forms reminiscent of antelope or small deer. They graze in herds across open plains, their incisors evolved into chisel-like tools for stripping bark and cutting stems. They move together, stamping trails across grasslands that overlay what were once highways. Forensic traces endure in the soil, ichnofossils of countless footprints pressed into fine mud, hardened by sun, buried, and later exposed again in rock. Future excavators may puzzle at the sheer density of tracks, a record of herds that lived where none had before. Predators follow naturally. Descendants of foxes and small carnivores grow leaner, faster, adapted to chase the new herbivores. Some evolve into pack hunters, working together to corner prey, their strategies etched into the fossil record by bone beds, showing multiple kills in single horizons. Others specialize as ambushers, leaving scratch marks on stone ledges where they sharpen claws. Trace fossils such as claw grooves and kill scatters become part of the Earth's archive, evidence not just of death but of life lived in full rhythm. In wetter regions, descendants of boars and wild pigs thrive. Their omnivorous diets and restless digging make them architects of soil. They churn ground until paleosols form, layers of mixed sediment that carry the imprint of rooting. Centuries of this activity leave signatures of bioturbation, disrupted strata, tunnels filled with organic matter, carbonate nodules scattered through mixed soils. To geologists, these patterns will stand out as the handiwork of life, reshaping the Earth as surely as glaciers once did. The fossil record of this adaptive radiation is rich with such details. A hoofprint preserved in dried clay, a burrow collapsed and filled with sand, later hardened into stone, a skeleton of a rodent giant found with teeth worn flat, evidence of grassland diets. Forensic insertions abound. Ichnofossils pressed into what were once concrete slabs, now mineralized into natural pavements. Root systems breaking through asphalt, long since turned to shale, their paths filled with calcite. These signs speak not of collapse, but of continuity, of life rushing in to occupy every open space. By the close of the first million years, the world hums with forms that never knew humanity. Birds dominate skies with wings vast as sails. Mammals, once dismissed as vermin, rule open plains in herds. Predators carve their niches, their bones mingling with prey and fossil beds. The Anthropocene seam lies far below, but above it life continues, radiant and unending. Evolution has not paused. It has simply turned the page. The oceans tell a story just as dramatic as the continents. Where coastlines once bristled with harbors, piers, and breakwaters, only reefs remain. What humans poured into the sea as steel, concrete, and stone has been digested and repurposed into architecture of another kind. Coral colonies take hold on rusted beams, their skeletons fusing around steel until metal vanishes, replaced entirely by carbonate. Fragments of glass and ceramics scattered along shores are cemented into reef walls, gleaming faintly within limestone. Over millions of years, the ruins of ports and coastal cities are transformed into reef cathedrals, living structures as vast and intricate as any temple once raised on land. Fishes swarm through these reefs, their scales flashing in shafts of light where once windows framed ocean views. Schools thread between concrete columns, now thick with coral branches. Sea turtles glide above plazas drowned long ago, their shells brushed by kelp that grows where fountains once bubbled. Sharks patrol the outer edges, their silhouettes sliding silently past statues toppled and encrusted with shells. The food webs of the sea have adapted, folding remnants of civilization into their foundations until no distinction remains between what was built and what has grown. Forensic evidence is sealed into every reef block. Thin sections of carbonate taken millions of years later will reveal aragonite crystals replacing rebar, calcite cement surrounding porcelain fragments. A petrographic lens will show ghost outlines of beams preserved as negative spaces within coral skeletons. Even plastiglomerates survive, fused into basal layers where waves tumbled polymer and basalt together. These inclusions tell future geologists that reefs once grew on the bones of cities, their chemistry altered by human artifacts but their vitality unbroken. The seabed itself carries the Anthropocene forward, layer upon layer of sand and silt, entomb plastics, microbeads, and ceramics. These mix with shells and organic debris, creating horizons unlike any before. 1,000 years after humanity vanished, they appeared as thin seams. After 1,000,000, they remain as glittering bands visible in cliff faces or cores drawn from the deep. To a future eye, these layers are unmistakable. Technofossils pressed alongside natural fossils, a mingling of Earth's own children with ours. Marine mammals, too, claim new spaces. Descendants of dolphins adapt to estuaries where drowned streets have become channels. Their echolocation clicks echo from concrete walls, now softened and colonized, but still hard enough to bounce sound. Whales pass overhead, their songs mingling with the hush of waves across ruined stadiums submerged in bays. The seas, once fragmented by shipping lanes and noise, are quieter, and in that silence, evolution has reshaped behaviors. Pods grow larger, songs carry farther, migration routes extend into regions long abandoned. Their bones, when fossilized, carry isotopic signatures of new diets, shifts in prey fish that colonized reef cathedrals instead of sandy shallows. Storms rearrange these ruins continually. Hurricanes tear coral from old foundations, scattering fragments that seed new colonies. Tsunamis push sediments inland, depositing shell hash and ceramic shards far from shore. These storm-lag deposits become another forensic marker, mixing natural debris with technofossils in ways no previous epoch ever recorded. Future scientists will read them as episodes of violence, cataloged in stone. The ocean is no longer littered with reminders of us. It is alive, transformed, its architecture indistinguishable from geology. Yet its memory is precise. A slice of reef will show porcelain shards glowing white within coral. A slab of limestone will reveal lines of plastic, fused and pressed. A shell bed will glitter with glass pebbles, too uniform to be mistaken for quartz. The Anthropocene remains written here, not in ruins above the water, but in living rock below it. Above these reefs, seabirds wheel and dive. They roost on islets built of rubble that waves have shaped into new forms. Their guano rains down, layering phosphates atop carbonates, another chemical horizon sealing the record. From sky to sea floor, from coral to silt, the oceans carry the memory forward. What was once our playground and resource is now their cathedral, their hunting ground, their archive. Life has not merely reclaimed the sea, it has incorporated us into its very body. Continents are never still. Over millions of years, seas rise and fall, ice presses continents downward and then releases them again, and tectonic plates shift slowly but surely. Where once oceans divided land masses, new corridors emerge. A chain of islands stretches into a bridge. A shallow strait dries into a wide plain. Animals cross these paths in waves of migration, and evolution follows with bursts of radiation and speciation. Rodent herds that filled one continent now find new plains on another, scattering into forms shaped by local climates. Some grow taller, antelope-like, adapted for speed across savannas. Others remain squat, tusked for digging, armored against predators. Predators themselves follow, their forms converging even across distant lands. A pack hunter in one hemisphere grows strikingly similar to one on another, though they share no ancestor except the small carnivores of long ago. Convergence is the rule in this new age. Niches demand forms, and evolution answers with familiar silhouettes drawn from different clay. Forests shift as well. Where deserts once stretched, rivers cut new paths, feeding green belts that crawl outward. Entire biomes move like tides across continents, leaving fossil records of pollen and roots in soils layered over Anthropocene rubble. Paleosols tell the tale, horizons churned by burrowing mammals, mottled with organic matter, carbonate nodules forming where roots once grew. Each new soil horizon buries the memory of cities more deeply, until only subtle chemical signatures betray their presence. Forensic insertions show how restless this world has become. Trace fossils cut across the Anthropocene seam, tunnels of giant burrowing mammals, claw marks of predators sharpening against stone ridges, feeding traces etched into petrified wood. What once was a crisp horizon now looks ragged, disrupted by life writing new chapters. The Anthropocene has not vanished, but it has been overwritten, broken into patches and ghosts by the busyness of creatures who never knew us. In one valley, along the bank of a wide river, stands a relic transformed into myth of stone. A cathedral once rose here, its dome collapsed long ago, its bones turned to cliff. Time has eroded its walls into sheer faces, carved by water into vertical sheets. Vines climb, roots probe, birds nest in hollow windows now petrified into rock. To the eye, it resembles nothing of human craft. To the animals who move through it, it is simply landscape. A herd of grazing rodent giants arrives at dusk, drinking from the river shallows. Their bodies are broad and striped, their incisors chisel sharp, their hooves clattering softly on stone polished by water. From the shadowed recesses of the cliff, predators stir. They are sleek, long-limbed, their eyes catching light, their breath visible in the cooling air. They move in silence, fanning out with instinct honed by generations. The hunt begins. The herd senses danger, splashes into the river, hooves thundering against submerged stones. One falters in the current, and the pack seizes its chance. They rush from cover, jaws snapping, claws raking, and the animal falls with a splash that sends ripples against the stone walls. The sound echoes strangely, as though the rock itself sings. The scene is brief, violent, and then over. The predators feed while the herd flees, silhouettes fading into the trees. Centuries later, floodwaters rise and carry fine silt into the valley. The carcass disappears, but its tracks remain. Hoofprints in mud harden, then fill with gypsum as waters retreat. Predator claw marks on stone are sealed by layers of calcite. The cliff preserves it all, a fossil cathedral inscribed not with prayers, but with the memory of a hunt. Millions of years later, a geologist might find this site and read it as sacred, a place of ceremony, echo, and sacrifice. In truth, it was simply life continuing, played against the backdrop of stone shaped by human hands long forgotten. Across continents, stories like this repeat. New corridors open, new predators chase new prey, and every trace is folded into rock. Life does not just return, it expands, converges, adapts. The landscapes we once called ours are now thoroughly theirs, rewritten by migrations that leave footprints across every horizon. As millions of years unspool, the Anthropocene fades into the deep record. What was once a crisp horizon of soot, plastics, and bones has been buried beneath kilometers of sediment. Volcanic eruptions lay down thick blankets of ash. Rivers deposit vast fans of silt. Forest soils pile horizon upon horizon. Yet the Anthropocene layer persists as a thin seam, dulled but distinct, a ribbon of strangeness woven into stone. It no longer looks like ruins. It looks like geology. Still, it speaks. Above that line, the fossil record thickens with new life. Plains that once held cities are now graveyards of great herds. In floodplains, The bones of rodent giants lie in tangled mats, deposited by seasonal floods. Skulls, ribs, and spines interlock in patterns that resemble bison kills of long ago, but on a scale unimaginable to human memory. Predators leave their marks as well. Bones with tooth gouges, skeletons disarticulated by scavenging, claw scratches etched into rock where hunts ended. These are not isolated finds, but entire bone beds, dense layers telling of stability, migration, and the full churn of life. The forensic signatures are vivid. Under magnification, bone microstructures show growth rings, thin and dark for lean years, thick and bright for plentiful ones. Blood vessel channels mineralize into delicate lattices, frozen testimony of circulatory systems. Isotopic ratios etched in enamel trace the migrations of herds, shifting with the seasons, proof that animals moved freely across landscapes, following water and grass. A future geologist reading these details will know not only that these creatures lived, but how they lived, when they starved, when they thrived, how far they roamed. Forests and wetlands layer fossils of another kind. Birds fall in colonies, their wings spread across silts, feathers leaving imprints that harden into ghostly outlines. Amphibians, adapted to warmer swamps, leave trails of eggs and skin sheddings sealed in clay. Insects are trapped in resin that fossilizes into amber, capturing new lineages in golden prisms. All of it is stacked above the Anthropocene seam, evidence of ecosystems reborn and diverse, written clearly in stone. Meanwhile, the Anthropocene horizon below is fractured and blurred. Burrowing mammals punch tunnels through it, dragging soil downward, pulling fragments upward. Bioturbation scatters technofossils across layers, a shard of porcelain here, a streak of plastic there. Roots press into it, leaving calcite-lined cavities that break its continuity. Rivers slice through, redepositing its contents miles away. The line is no longer neat, but its chemistry remains, enriched in carbon, nitrogen, and metals not otherwise native to that depth. It is messy, but unmistakable. The climax comes not in a single discovery, but in the recognition of a boundary. To any who read The Rocks, the Anthropocene appears like the iridium band that marks the death of dinosaurs, thin, strange, abrupt. Below it lie fossils of animals shaped by people, cattle, dogs, cats, crops pressed into char. Above it lie fossils of creatures that never knew us, radiations born of freedom and absence. It is a before and after line, visible across the planet, from mountain cores to ocean cliffs. Life above that line flourishes with no memory of us. Reefs built on drowned cities rise into limestone mountains. Herds migrate across plains where skyscrapers once pierced the sky. New predators evolve forms eerily familiar, sabered teeth, raptor claws, pack hunters, yet they carry no heritage from the old. Their bones lie in layered fossil fields, their shapes preserved long after flesh has gone. The earth records them faithfully, just as it recorded us, without judgment or hierarchy. And still, the seam remains. Drill into the crust millions of years hence, and you will strike it, a band flecked with glass, laced with soot, dotted with bone beds of livestock. A thin horizon, yes, but one that tells the entire story of a species that rose, remade the planet, and vanished. It is humanity's final monument, not carved above ground but pressed beneath it, indelible as any extinction marker. Closing the chapter, the message is clear. The Anthropocene is over, but its record will never fade. Life has replaced us, evolved beyond us, filled the niches we left behind. The world above is wilderness again, radiant and whole. The world below carries our memory in stone. And beyond, time stretches on, millions of years still to come, an open future where new intelligences may rise, or where silence will reign eternal, and only fossils will speak. There are two ways to imagine the far future of Earth. One path is silence, a planet alive but voiceless, where no intelligence rises again to shape tools or ask questions. The other path is succession, a new mind emerging from wilderness, inheriting the role once held by us, crafting meaning from stone and sky. After tens of millions of years, both futures are possible. Evolution is patient. Time does not decide quickly. The Anthropocene seam still lingers beneath countless horizons of soil and rock. It glitters faintly with plastics and glass, its chemistry spiked with soot, isotopes, and metals. To us, it was history. To the Earth, it is merely a horizon. Above it, forests stretch without interruption, seas teem with creatures uncounted, skies fill with wings. But buried within the planet's memory, the question remains open. Will silence reign forever, or will another intelligence awaken? The Earth will not choose. It records without preference. The answer lies only in chance, mutation, and the slow weaving of life. The vision of silence is not barren. It is full, vibrant, even overwhelming. The world hums with voices of birds, roars of predators, the whisper of leaves, the pounding of surf. Forests unfurl across continents, their canopies dense and ancient, their roots gripping stone once poured as concrete. Rivers braid valleys, carrying silt to seas. Grasslands shimmer with herds. Insects spiral in clouds. Amphibians chorus after rains. Life abounds, but none of these sounds are shaped into words. None become thought reflecting upon itself. This is a wilderness of instinct, not consciousness. In such a world, extinction and evolution continue without witness. Species bloom, adapt, and vanish. Rodents grow large and then disappear. Birds fill skies and then falter. Climate shifts, glaciers advance and retreat, deserts expand and shrink. All the familiar rhythms of deep time continue. For 200 million years, dinosaurs ruled without philosophy. For 50 million years, mammals thrived without history. Why should the Earth require intelligence now? To the planet, consciousness is no more necessary than wings or scales. It is one strategy among many, and it may pass as quickly as it came. The Anthropocene seam becomes a curiosity, unexamined, undebated, unseen. It lies hidden beneath soils churned by burrows, roots pressing downward, rivers scattering fragments of technofossils far from their source. Plastics become streaks in cliffs, porcelain shards glitter in beaches, soot lines blur into darker soils, but no mind pauses to wonder. A bird may perch on a shard of glass, a mammal may dig through soot horizons, neither will ask what they mean. The record remains, but it is never read. The silence is forensic in its precision. In other epochs, intelligence left clear marks, stone tools with chipped edges, bones bearing cut marks, hearths rimmed in ash. Here, there are none. Fossilized bones carry only the signatures of tooth and claw, not blade. Cave floors show paw prints, not fire pits. River sediments are littered with shells and bones, not pottery. Trace fossils are plentiful, burrows, tracks, nests, but they are only the work of instinct, not invention. To a geologist of another world, drilling through these layers, it would seem as if intelligence blinked briefly into existence, left a seam, then vanished forever. This silence is not tragic to the Earth. It is balance. Energy flows smoothly through ecosystems. Carbon cycles from tree to soil to sky. Nitrogen returns through roots and leaves. Predator and prey maintain equilibrium. Without language, there is no myth of loss. Without reflection, there is no story of decline. There is only process, and in that process, the Earth thrives. Yet to us, imagining, this silence carries poignancy. We want intelligence to mean permanence. We want thought to continue, to grow, to look at stars and ask again the questions we once asked. But in truth, there is no guarantee. Intelligence may have been nothing more than a spark, a flare that illuminated the world briefly before fading, a fire lit by chance mutation, burning for a few tens of thousands of years, then gone. The forests and oceans do not miss it. They were always whole. The silence is not emptiness. It is wholeness without reflection. Still, within this silence lies a lesson. If no successor rises, then our species stands alone in history. The one consciousness the Earth produced, the one storyteller, the one that asked, why? Our monuments have crumbled, but our seam remains, buried and quiet. It will endure as long as cliffs stand and cores are drilled. But if no mind ever again comes to read it, then the Anthropocene is not a message. It is a scar that records what was, but does not explain why. The forests will grow tall, the seas will surge, the mountains will rise and fall, the world will not pause. And if silence is the path chosen by chance and time, then the earth will continue its endless cycles without intelligence, without philosophy, without story. Only silence, vast and eternal. Silence is one possibility, but evolution is restless. Across millions of years, gaps in ecosystems invite experiments. Some lineages falter, others flourish, and a few may stumble toward complexity beyond instinct. If intelligence were to return to the earth, it would not resemble us. It would arise from different bodies, different senses, different hungers. Birds offer one path. Even in our age, corvids and parrots showed remarkable problem-solving skills. Freed from human interference, their descendants may grow larger, brains expanding with bodies, until they command the skies as thinkers as well as hunters. A raven the size of an eagle might one day shape twigs into tools, scratch symbols into bark, or leave patterned nests that fossilize as architectural traces. Centuries later, bones scarred with deliberate grooves or shards of stone with repetitive wear could hint at behavior not born of accident but of design. The oceans hold other contenders. Cephalopods, octopuses and squid, already displayed color languages and uncanny intelligence. Their soft bodies seldom fossilize, but their actions leave residue. Shells stacked in deliberate heaps could harden into middens. Coral fragments dragged into barriers could fossilize as unlikely alignments. To future eyes, such deposits might appear artificial, concentrations too precise to be chance. In these silent heaps would lie the suggestion of minds communicating beneath waves. On land, mammals continue to experiment. Rodents, abundant and adaptable, might evolve into social architects. From burrowers, they could become builders, carving labyrinths of tunnels that stretch for kilometers, systems so intricate they resemble cities. Over geologic time, these paleosols would preserve chambers aligned in patterns, walls reinforced with clay, networks so structured they suggest intention. Fossil traces of communal life, multiple skeletons in shared chambers, aligned gnaw marks on stored food, might signal cooperation far beyond instinct. Even primates cannot be ruled out. Though many vanished early in the post-human age, a few lineages might endure in sheltered refuges. Over eons, some could evolve into forms with enlarged brains and dexterous hands, crafting tools of stone or bone. Their evidence would be subtle but telling. Cut marks on prey bones, hearth-like concentrations of ash, or chipped flakes of quartz with repetitive edges. These signs would be faint, scattered, perhaps dismissed at first as natural, until patterns revealed themselves. And somewhere in this speculative future, a scene unfolds that could fossilize into legend. Along the bank of a river cutting through ancient limestone, crystalline quartz juts from the cliff face. A grazing creature, no larger than a dog but with nimble forelimbs and sharp eyes, pauses from its herd. It plucks a shard of quartz from the rock, turns it curiously, and presses it against the carcass of a fallen animal. The edge bites, leaving a clean groove. The creature tilts its head, repeats the motion, and marrow spills from the bone. Others gather, imitating. Soon the ground is littered with crystals, each worn at the same angle, each bearing the polish of use. Floods bury the scene in silt. Millennia later, when the river cuts deeper, the fossils reveal bones with parallel grooves and quartz blades dulled by repeated scraping. To a geologist in the far future, these artifacts would be extraordinary. They would stand as evidence of behavior beyond survival, of thought-shaping matter for purpose. The scratches in bone would not look like tooth marks. The grooves in quartz would not resemble glacial striations. They would seem deliberate, intentional, a record of minds that had turned curiosity into tool. In this way, intelligence may return quietly, not in skyscrapers or satellites, but in crystal and bone. It may never build cities, never speak in words, never map the stars. Yet it would be enough to leave faint signals in stone, enough to prove that Earth did not remain silent forever, that thought once more took root in wilderness and carved its name, however briefly, into the fossil record. Across millions of years, the Earth is no longer ours. Forests thrive, oceans shimmer with life, mountains rise and collapse. To any visitor from beyond the stars, the surface looks timeless and untouched. Yet buried deep in cliffs and cores, a single seam betrays a different story. It is thin, often no wider than the length of a hand, but within it lies a strangeness. Plastics fused with basalt, shards of glass, porcelain too smooth to be natural, isotopes that do not belong. This seam is the Anthropocene, the one line that will testify to our brief experiment with intelligence. If other minds ever arrive, their instruments will find it. Orbiting probes will scan the planet's chemistry, noting oxygen-rich skies, methane from swamps, and the constant whisper of photosynthesis. All signs will confirm a thriving biosphere, but deep sensors will detect anomalies, horizons enriched with carbon-14, soils saturated with nitrogen, sediments studded with artificial beads of glass. Something happened here, something abrupt and global. It will puzzle them, for nature seldom writes so sharply. When they drill into the crust, the core samples will glitter oddly. Plastiglomerates will gleam black and green, melted polymers bound with sand and stone. Fly ash spheres, perfect glass beads born of combustion, will appear in dense clouds at the seam. Carbon isotopes will spike unnaturally, matched by sudden declines in biodiversity. The visitors will lay these facts on their tables and argue. One insists it is a cosmic catastrophe, perhaps a meteor strike. Another claims it is ritual. The strange objects resemble votive offerings scattered by some vanished cult. A third believes it was intelligence, a species that burned too brightly, reshaped the earth, and then was gone. The debate will not end easily because the record is precise but mute. The spike of carbon-14 left by nuclear detonations is global, unmistakable. Yet to alien eyes, it could mimic radiation from an asteroid impact. Nitrogen enrichment in soils, residues of fertilizer, stretch across continents. But to them it may resemble outgassing from volcanic fields. Fly ash spheres look almost identical to tektites formed by cosmic collisions. Without our memory, the distinction blurs. The Earth keeps evidence, not explanation. They might find bone beds of cattle, dogs, and cats layered within the seam. To us, these are signs of domestication, of agriculture, of life bound to human needs. But to them, they may look like sudden, unnatural population bursts, or worse, sacrificial deposits. Shards of porcelain may gleam like gems, artifacts too refined for chance. Plastics might be mistaken for volcanic glass. Even soot horizons to their models could be the signature of celestial fire. What was industry to us might appear as worship or apocalypse to them. And yet, through the haze of misinterpretation, a truth would emerge. Something unique happened, a planetary pulse, brief and global, unlike any other epoch. Nowhere else in the record is there a layer of technofossils, nowhere else a spike of artificial isotopes, nowhere else bone beds so skewed toward the domestic. The visitors may not know our names, our stories, or our intentions, but they would know this: a species once remade the earth, left its mark, and vanished. It is humbling to imagine our legacy as a riddle. We dreamed of monuments, of signals broadcast to the stars, of permanence in culture. What endures instead is geology, a seam of soot, glass, and polymer. It will not tell our myths. It will not preserve our languages. It will only whisper, something intelligent passed here. What it was, why it ended, how it lived, those answers are gone. Yet, perhaps the ambiguity is fitting. Our story is not written as certainty, but as echo. To alien interpreters, we may be victims of disaster, or worshippers of fire, or careless builders undone by our own success. Whatever meaning they draw, they will be correct in one way. We changed the earth. Our presence is undeniable, pressed forever into stone. And so the Anthropocene becomes not just a seam of fossils, but a cosmic message. It is not the message we intended, but it is the one that remains. If minds come from beyond, they will read it, argue over it, and in that act of recognition, humanity will echo once more, carried not in memory but in mystery. In the end, What remains is a question. If no successor arises, the earth will sing with life but without thought. Forests will stretch across continents, seas will swell with shoals, predators will hunt and die, prey will graze and vanish. The Anthropocene seam will endure, but it will be silent, never read, never interpreted. Humanity's memory will exist only as chemistry and stone, a scar folded into geology. To us it may seem a tragedy, but to the earth it is simply balance restored. Life has no need of mirrors to thrive, yet if a successor comes, the story changes. Somewhere, in forest or sea, in burrow or reef, a lineage may stumble onto awareness. It may carve stone, stack shells, polish quartz, or scratch grooves into bone. These traces, faint at first, will fossilize. Millions of years later, they will lie beside the Anthropocene seam, a second horizon layered above the first. Intelligence will not have vanished. It will have shifted shape, carried forward in feathers, in tentacles, in paws. The earth will have given birth to new storytellers, though their stories will never include ours. The climax of this imagining lies in the first recognition. Perhaps it comes when a creature lifts a tool deliberately shaped, not just found. Perhaps it comes when a group gathers around fire, its ash staining cave floors that later harden into stone. Or perhaps it comes when alien visitors, drilling into the crust, pull up a core glittering with technofossils and bones, and pause, realizing this was not accident, but intention. In that instant, the Anthropocene speaks again, not in words but in evidence. It declares that a species once lived, asked, built, and ended. The reflection is double-edged. On one hand, our reign was brief, a spark that flared and faded. Compared to the eons of reptiles, the ages of ammonites, the vast dominion of trilobites, humanity's time was barely an exhalation. On the other, we left a signal sharper than almost any before. Few species have written themselves into geology so clearly. Our monuments may crumble, our texts may vanish, but the seam remains. It is not grand, not glorious, but it is undeniable. Forensic eyes in the far future, whether belonging to successors of Earth or visitors from elsewhere, will read the seam imperfectly. They may misinterpret, they may argue, but they will know something unique occurred. They will know intelligence came, altered the planet, and passed. That knowledge alone sets us apart, even if our names are lost. Closing the chapter, we return to the question, silence or successor? Perhaps no new mind will rise, and the earth will roll forward in rhythms unbroken, a green sphere without reflection. Perhaps another will appear, strange and alien, and begin again the long experiment of consciousness. Either way, the Anthropocene seam ensures that we will not be erased completely. We will be remembered not as we hoped, but as we were, a species that dreamed of permanence and achieved it only in stone. The earth continues, life flows, time deepens, and buried in the rock, our voice remains, waiting for ears that may never come, or for eyes that will misunderstand. Yet even in silence, the seam speaks. It is our final story, pressed into the planet itself, whispering across eternity. The story of humanity does not end with fire or flood, but with absence. From the first day of silence, when homes stood still and streets emptied, through the collapse of cities, the fading of light, and the return of wilderness, the earth has carried on. Our monuments fell, our voices vanished, but life surged forward, filling every gap we left behind. The forests grew thicker, the seas grew wilder, and the animals once overshadowed by us reclaimed the rhythm that had always been theirs. Centuries became millennia, and the ruins of our world dissolved into geology. Bridges turned to stone ribs beneath rivers, towers into hills cloaked with soil, harbors into reefs, bright with coral. Our presence retreated into chemistry, veins of rust where steel decayed, carbonate nodules where concrete hardened, plastiglomerates where fire fused sand and polymer. In time, the Anthropocene became not a memory, but a horizon, a thin line pressed into rock. It was a boundary, as sharp as any extinction mark, dividing what came before from what followed after. Above that line, life flourished. New herds thundered across plains. Predators sharpened their claws on stone ridges. Birds with vast wings carved shadows across forests. The oceans reimagined themselves, building reef cathedrals from the skeletons of our cities. Continents shifted, corridors opened, species migrated, converged, and transformed. Evolution did not mourn us. It adapted, reshaped, radiated. Where we saw endings, the earth saw only beginnings. Millions of years passed, and the seam remained. It held our story in fragments, bone beds of cattle and dogs, shards of glass, soot horizons, isotopic spikes. To Earth, they were layers. To future eyes, whether animal successors or alien explorers, they might be clues, riddles, or echoes. Some might see catastrophe, others ceremony, a few perhaps intelligence. The record itself could not explain. It could only whisper, something happened here, something different. And at last the question returns. Will the planet remain forever a wilderness, radiant but silent, or will a new mind rise to wonder again? Perhaps no successor will appear, and our seam will remain a scar never read, folded deeper and deeper into stone. Or perhaps a lineage will awaken, bird, beast, or cephalopod, and carve its own marks into geology, building a second horizon above ours. Or perhaps minds from beyond will arrive, drilling cores, lifting samples, and pausing in astonishment at the strangeness of our signal. We will not be here to know which path is taken. Yet the Earth remembers. It remembers in minerals and sediments, in isotopes and fossils, in layers of silence pressed into rock. Our monuments were temporary, our languages fragile. But our impact was written in the deepest archive, where time itself is the keeper. The epilogue is not ours to finish. It belongs to the earth, and to whoever may come after. In the end, we are a seam. Thin, dark, glittering with fragments. A line across stone that will outlast empires, species, even mountains. A story without words, waiting for readers who may never come. But even unread, it endures. The earth has carried us into eternity, not as rulers, not as survivors, but as a horizon.